Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Sam Whitmore, and I've been taking care of these Blue Ridge Mountains for 19 years now. Every morning I wake up in my ranger cabin near Thornton Gap, put on my uniform, and head out to make sure folks can enjoy Shenandoah National Park safely. It's a good job, one my daddy would have been proud of, though he never lived to see me get it. These mountains are in my blood. My family's been here for 3 generations, back when this was all private land with little farms tucked into every valley. When the government made this into a park back in the 1930s, they had to move a lot of families out, mine included. My grandfather, Jesse Whitmore, had to leave the cabin his daddy built with his own hands. But Jesse didn't hold grudges. He used to tell me the mountains belonged to everyone, not just us. What I remember most about Grandpa Jesse was his voice. Lord, could that man sing? He was what folks call a shape note singer, part of those old-time singing schools where people would gather in churches and homes to learn hymns and spirituals. His voice was pure tenor, clear as mountain water. When he sang Amazing Grace or The Old Rugged Cross, it could make grown men cry. Me, I never could carry a tune. Lost my voice in an accident when I was 8. Fell off a horse and landed wrong. Crushed something in my throat. Doctor said I'd probably never sing again. And he was right. I can talk just fine. But when I try to sing, nothing but a croak comes out. It broke Grandpa's heart, I think. He'd always hoped I'd carry on the family tradition. Now I carry his old pitch pipe instead. It's a little round metal thing with holes around the edge, helps singers find the right note to start with. I keep it in my shirt pocket, right over my heart. Sometimes when I'm nervous, I find myself tapping out rhythms on my leg, imagining I'm keeping time for some invisible choir. This story isn't really about me missing music. It's about what happened in October of 1963, when I first heard the Dead singing in Devil's Backbone Hollow. It started with complaints from campers. 3 different groups in 2 weeks, all saying the same thing. They'd been woken up around midnight by the most beautiful singing they'd ever heard. Harmonies floating down from the ridge above their tents, clear as day but impossible to locate. When they'd go looking with flashlights, the music would stop. But as soon as they settled back into their sleeping bags, it would start up again. Probably just some local kids fooling around, my supervisor said when I reported it. You know how sound carries in these hollows at night. But I knew these mountains better than anyone, and I knew every local family for miles around. Nobody came up to Devil's Backbone to sing church songs at midnight. The trail up there was treacherous enough in daylight, let alone in the dark. And the location itself gave most folks the shivers. Even the old-timers avoided that ridge after sunset. Devil's Backbone got its name honestly. It's a narrow, rocky spine that runs between 2 deep hollows, barely wide enough for a single-file trail. Local legend says it's haunted, though by what, nobody could ever agree. Some said Confederate soldiers who died up there during the war. Others claimed it was Cherokee spirits, angry about being driven from their sacred places. Grandpa Jesse always said the name came from the wind whistling through the rocks, making sounds like voices calling out in pain. I'd been up there plenty of times doing my job, checking trail markers, looking for damaged trees after storms, making sure hikers weren't leaving trash behind. It was definitely an eerie place. The air always felt heavier up there, and birds didn't seem to like it much, but I'd never heard any singing. Complaints were complaints, and it was my job to investigate. So, on a crisp October morning, with leaves just starting to turn and fog still clinging to the valleys, I loaded my pack with gear and headed up the trail to Devil's Backbone. The hike took about 2 hours, winding through stands of oak and maple across a couple of creek beds, then up the steep rocky path that led to the ridge. I knew every root and stone, had walked this trail hundreds of times. But something felt different that morning. The usual forest sounds, Birds chirping, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing, seemed muffled and distant. When I reached the top of Devil's Backbone, I found something I'd never noticed before. Just off the main trail, hidden by a screen of mountain laurel bushes, was a natural depression in the rock, almost perfectly round, maybe 40 feet across, with sloping sides that formed a shallow bowl. The acoustics were incredible. When I clapped my hands, the sound bounced back and forth between the rock walls like I was standing in a church. I spent the better part of an hour searching the area for signs of recent visitors. No footprints, no cigarette butts, no evidence anyone had been camping or gathering there. The only thing I found was strange. Several flat rocks arranged in a semicircle around the edge of the depression, like seats, but they were covered in moss and lichen, like they'd been there for decades. That night, I came back with my camping gear and set up about 100 yards down the trail from the depression. If someone was coming up here to sing, I'd catch them in the act. I had my flashlight, my service radio, and a thermos of coffee to keep me alert. Around 11:30, the forest went completely quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet you get at night. This was different. No owl calls, no rustling leaves, nothing. Even the wind seemed to stop. The silence was so thick, it made my ears ring. Then, just as the church bells in the valley below began chiming midnight, I heard it. A single voice, clear and sweet, singing, "Shall we gather at the river?" A woman's soprano, pure as crystal, coming from the direction of the rocky depression. As the first verse ended, other voices joined in, men's voices, tenor and bass blending into four-part harmony that was prettier than anything I'd ever heard. My blood went cold. That tenor voice, the one carrying the melody now, I knew it. I'd grown up listening to it every Sunday at church, every evening around the dinner table, every time Grandpa Jesse got the notion to sing. But Grandpa Jesse had been dead for 10 years. I sat there in my sleeping bag, frozen, listening to my dead grandfather's voice float through the October air. The harmony was perfect. Soprano, alto, tenor, and bass weaving together like golden threads. They moved from "Shall we gather at the river" into "In the sweet by and by." Then, "When the roll is called up yonder." All the old hymns Grandpa used to sing. But it wasn't just his voice I recognized now. As I listened closer, other familiar sounds emerged from that impossible choir. There was Mrs. Henderson's alto. She'd passed 5 years back. And that bass voice rumbling underneath the melody belonged to old Tom McReady, who died in a logging accident when I was 12. These were all people from my childhood, people who'd sung together in the little church down in the valley before they died. And now, somehow, they were singing together again on this haunted ridge. I tried to make myself move, to creep closer and see what was happening. But my body wouldn't obey. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to not draw attention to myself. Whatever was happening up there, it wasn't meant for the living. The singing went on for maybe 20 minutes, moving through hymn after hymn with voices so pure they made my chest ache. When they finally stopped, the silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on the mountain. And then, gradually, normal forest sounds returned. A distant owl call, wind rustling through dry leaves, the scurry of some small animal in the underbrush. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in my bag, staring up at the stars and trying to make sense of what I'd heard. When dawn finally broke, I packed up my gear and hiked straight back to the ranger station. "Find anything unusual?" my supervisor asked when I walked into the office. "Just some odd acoustics," I lied. "Probably sound carrying up from the valley churches." But I couldn't let it go. That afternoon I drove to the county library in Luray and started digging through old records. What I found made my hands shake as I turned the yellowed pages. In October of 1887, exactly 76 years ago to the day, there had been a tragic accident at Devil's Backbone. A group of 23 people from various local churches had gathered there for what they called a singing school, a weekend retreat where folks would camp out and spend their time learning new hymns and practicing harmony. They'd chosen the spot because of those natural rock formations that made such perfect acoustics. On the second night of their gathering, a freak storm had rolled in. High winds had toppled several large trees, and one had come crashing down right into their campsite. 23 people died, crushed in their sleep. The newspaper account was brief but heartbreaking. The voices that had filled our valley with such beautiful music were silenced forever in a single terrible moment. Among the dead was a man named Jeremiah Whitmore, my great-great-grandfather, Grandpa Jesse's grandfather, a well-known shape note singer and song leader. I spent the next week trying to convince myself it was all coincidence. Maybe the stress of the job was getting to me. Maybe I dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe there was some perfectly rational explanation for what I'd heard. But deep down, I knew better, and I knew I had to go back. This time I came prepared. I brought a battery-powered tape recorder, fresh batteries, extra flashlights, and my grandfather's pitch pipe, though I wasn't sure why. I set up my camp in the same spot as before and waited for midnight. The forest went quiet again, that same unnatural silence that made the air feel thick and heavy. But this time, I was ready when the singing started. I fumbled with the tape recorder, hitting the record button as the first notes of Amazing Grace drifted through the darkness. The voices were even clearer tonight, more distinct. I could hear the rustle of clothing, the soft scuff of feet moving on rock. Whatever this was, it was more than just disembodied voices. Forcing myself to be brave, I crept closer to the depression, staying low and moving as quietly as possible. The singing grew louder with each step, those gorgeous harmonies wrapping around me like warm honey. When I reached the edge of the rocky bowl, I peered down through the mountain laurel bushes. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. They were all there, just like I remembered them from life, but somehow faded. Like old photographs that had been left in the sun too long. About 20 people in old-fashioned clothes, the women in long dresses and bonnets, the men in work shirts and suspenders. They stood in that same semicircle of mossy rocks I'd found earlier, their mouths open in song, their faces lifted toward the star-filled sky. And there, right in the center, conducting them with broad, graceful gestures, was my grandfather Jesse. He looked exactly as he had when I was 10 years old, tall and lean, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing the same blue work shirt he'd been buried in. As I watched, transfixed, Grandpa's gaze suddenly shifted. His eyes met mine across the rocky depression, and he smiled, that same warm, loving smile I remembered from childhood. He raised one hand in a small wave, never missing a beat, baw, as he continued conducting with the other. That's when I realized something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. I could see the stars shining through him, the tape recorder in tools. My hands started making a grinding noise, then went silent. When I looked down, I saw that the plastic casing was cracked, the batteries completely drained, despite being brand new. My flashlight flickered and died. Even my wristwatch had stopped, its hands frozen at exactly midnight. When I looked back up, the singers were gone. The depression was empty, except for shadows and moonlight. But I could still hear an echo of their voices lingering in the air, like the last notes of a song fading in a church after the organ stops. I stumbled back to my camp and spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, every nerve on edge. When morning came, I hiked down to the nearest phone and called in sick to work. Then I drove straight to the cemetery where Grandpa Jesse was buried. His headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and a single line. His voice was lifted in praise. I knelt there in the damp grass, trying to understand what was happening to me, why I was seeing and hearing impossible things. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I figured I'd find you here. I spun around to see Mrs. Harper, the librarian from town, walking between the headstones with a bundle of papers in her arms. She was in her 70s, a tiny woman with snow-white hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Harper? What are you doing here?" "Same as you, I expect. Looking for answers." She sat down on a stone bench near Grandpa's grave and patted the spot beside her. "After you were in the library yesterday, digging through those old records, I did some digging of my own. Found some things I thought you might want to see." She handed me a manila folder thick with photocopied documents. Death certificates from that 1887 accident. Newspaper clippings from 3 different counties. And this, she pulled out a faded photograph showing a group of people in old-fashioned bedclothes standing in what looked like the same rocky depression I'd found on Devil's Backbone. That picture was taken 2 days before they all died, Mrs. Harper said quietly. The photographer was a traveling man who'd come to document the singing schools for some magazine back east. He survived because he'd gone back down to town to develop his plates. I studied the faces in the photograph. They looked so alive, so happy. In the center stood a tall man with a strong jaw and kind eyes, one hand raised as if he was about to start conducting. The family resemblance was unmistakable. "That's Jeremiah Whitmore," Mrs. Harper said. "Your great-great-grandfather. They say he had the most beautiful tenor voice in 3 counties. "Mrs. Harper," I said slowly, "do you believe in ghosts?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking out across the cemetery where autumn leaves were falling like golden rain. "I believe some things leave echoes," she finally said, "especially things that were loved deeply and lost suddenly. Music, most of all. Music has a way of lingering." That night, I went back to Devil's Backbone for the 3rd time. But I didn't hide in the woods this time. When midnight came and the forest fell silent, I walked right up to the edge of the rocky depression and waited. The singing started with "Shall We Gather at the River," just like before. But this time, when Grandpa Jesse appeared with his ghostly choir, I didn't run. I stood there at the edge of the bowl, looking down at them, and he looked back up at me with those kind, familiar eyes. "Hello, Sam," he said, though his lips didn't move. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, like it was carried on the wind itself. "I've been waiting for you." "Grandpa?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Are you really there? As real as memory, as real as love." He gestured to the other singers around him. "We're all here, Sam. All of us who loved music more than life itself." I noticed something I'd missed before. The ghostly figures weren't just the people who died in 1887 mixed in with. Them were others I recognized. Mrs. Henderson, Tom McReady, and several other folks from the valley who'd passed away over the years. All of them singers. All of them drawn to this place after death. "What happened here?" I asked. "What keeps you here?" Grandpa's expression grew sad. "The same thing that's calling to you, child. This hollow has a hunger for music, for voices raised in harmony. It's been here since before the Cherokee, since before any human set foot on this mountain. The accident in 1887 wasn't really an accident. It was a feeding." "A feeding?" "There's something old living in this ridge, Sam. Something that feeds on human voices, on the joy we find in music. It draws singers to this place, fills them with the most beautiful harmonies they've ever heard, then traps their voices here forever." I felt cold fingers of dread creeping up my spine. "Then why are you warning me? Why don't you just let it take me too?" "Because you're family. Because you're special." He took a step closer, and I could smell the familiar scent of pipe tobacco that always clung to his clothes. "You lost your voice as a child, Sam. That makes you invisible to the entity most of the time. But it also makes you the only one who can hear us clearly, the only one who can help." "Help how?" Before he could answer, the temperature around the depression dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The ghostly singers suddenly looked terrified, their song cutting off mid-note. They began backing away from the center of the circle, pressing against the rock walls like they were trying to escape. That's when I saw it. Rising from the deepest part of the rocky bowl came a shadow that was darker than the darkness around it. It had no fixed shape, flowing like black water, but I could sense its immense size and age. This was what had been here all along, the thing that fed on human voices and detrapped souls. The entity turned what might have been its attention toward me, and I felt its hunger like a physical force. It knew I was there now, knew that my damaged voice made me different from its usual prey. But it also sensed something else. The pitch pipe in my shirt pocket, still carrying traces of my grandfather's music. The shadow began to grow larger, reaching toward me with tendrils of pure darkness. The temperature dropped even further, and frost began forming on the rocks around the depression. "Run, Sam!" Grandpa Jesse shouted, his voice fading as the entity's attention turned back to its captive choir. "Don't let it trap you, too!" I ran, stumbled through the darkness, crashing through bushes and tripping over roots, not stopping until I reached my truck at the trailhead. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. But as I drove away, I could hear them singing again. Fainter now, but still there. All those trapped voices calling out in the night, including my grandfather's familiar tenor weaving through the harmony like a golden thread. I knew I couldn't leave them there. I knew I had to find a way to set them free, even if it meant facing that ancient, hungry darkness again. The question was, how do you fight something that feeds on the very thing you've always longed to do yourself? I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about the entity on Devil's Backbone. Mrs. Harper helped, pulling out old Cherokee legends and settler stories that had been dismissed as superstition for over a century. The Cherokee had a name for it, Nvi Atsila, the Hungry Echo. According to their oral traditions, it was an ancient spirit that had been trapped in the mountain since before human memory. It fed on the voices of singers, growing stronger with each soul it claimed. The Cherokee had learned to avoid the Ridgeab entirely, considering it cursed ground. But the European settlers didn't know the old stories. They saw the natural amphitheater and thought it was perfect for their singing schools and revivals. The entity had been feeding regularly ever since. "There might be a way to weaken it," Mrs. Harper said, spreading a hand-drawn map across her kitchen table. "According to this legend, the Hungry Echo can be confused by broken harmony, music that starts together but doesn't follow the expected patterns." "Like what?" "Like a conductor who leads singers off-key on purpose, or a song that begins in one key but shifts to another without warning." The Cherokee used drumming rhythms that were deliberately offbeat to drive it away from their sacred ceremonies. I touched the pitch pipe in my pocket, remembering how Grandpa used it to give singers their starting note. What if we could break its hold on the trapped voices? "Dangerous thinking, Sam. If you try and fail, you'll just become another voice in its collection." But I was already forming a plan. That night I went back to Devil's Backbone one more time, carrying the pitch pipe and a new understanding of what I had to do. When midnight came and the ghostly choir appeared, I walked straight down into the rocky depression. The entity sensed me immediately, rising from the shadows with tendrils of darkness reaching out to envelop me. "Grandpa," I called out, "I know what we have to do." Jesse looked at me with terror in his translucent eyes. "Sam, get out of here. Don't let it take you." "It can't take me," I said, pulling out the pitch pipe. "Not completely. My voice is already broken." I put the pipe to my lips and blew the note for middle C. The clear, pure tone cut through the entity's darkness like a blade, and for a moment, the shadow recoiled. "Now!" I shouted to the ghostly singers. "Follow my lead, but don't follow exactly. Everyone sing, but in your own key." Grandpa understood immediately. Instead of conducting them in perfect harmony, he began leading them into deliberate discord, the soprano voix. Seth sang in one key, while the alto sang in another. The tenors and basses followed completely different rhythms. It should have sounded terrible. It should have been noise instead of music. But somehow, impossibly, it was beautiful in a way that perfect harmony never could be. Each voice was distinct and individual, not blended into a collective whole. The entity thrived on voices joined in unity. But this wild, chaotic music was something it had never encountered before. The Hungry Echo writhed and twisted, its dark form becoming more agitated with each clashing note. I could feel its confusion, its inability to process music that refused to follow the rules it understood. "Keep going," I yelled, continuing to blow different notes on the pitch pipe, not to guide them into harmony, but to create even more discord. The entity let out a sound like wind shrieking through broken stone. Its grip on the trapped souls began to weaken. Some of the ghostly figures started to fade, not disappearing but becoming less solid, as if they were finally free to move on. But the effort was taking everything I had. Each breath through the pitch pipe felt like breathing fire. My throat damaged since childhood, began to burn and seize. I could feel something tearing inside, the last remnants of my voice being destroyed by the strain. "Sam, stop!" Grandpa Jesse called out. "You're killing yourself!" But I couldn't stop. Not when I could see Mrs. Henderson smiling as she faded into peaceful light. Not when Tom McCready gave me a grateful nod before dissolving into stardust. One by one, the trapped souls were finding their freedom through the power of broken music. The entity made one last desperate attempt to claim me, sending a wave of shadow crashing toward where I stood. But instead of trying to fight it, I did something it couldn't understand. I began to laugh. Even with my throat and fire, even with my voice completely gone now, I laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, a man who couldn't sing, defeating an ancient entity that fed on perfect harmony by creating the most beautifully imperfect music the mountain had ever heard. The laughter broke something fundamental in the entity's hold on this place. The shadow gave one final shriek and collapsed in on itself, sinking back into the depths of the rocky depression. Not destroyed, something that old and hungry could never be truly killed, but weakened enough that it would be decades before it could trap voices again. When the darkness finally retreated, only 3 ghostly figures remained in the circle. Grandpa Jesse stood with 2 other men I didn't recognize, all of them smiling sadly. "The original 3, Grandpa explained, his voice growing fainter. "We chose to stay, Sam. Someone has to guard this place, to warn away future singers until the entity sleeps again." "Grandpa, no. Come with me. You're free now." He shook his head. "This is our choice. Our music will keep it sleeping. And you have work to do down in the world of the living." He walked over to me, and for just a moment, his ghostly hand felt solid and warm as it touched my cheek. "I'm proud of you, boy. You found your voice after all, not in singing, but in saving others. That's a better gift than perfect pitch could ever be." As dawn broke over the mountain, the 3 guardian spirits faded until only the faintest outline remained. I knew they were still there, would always be there, keeping their eternal watch over Devil's Backbone. I was found the next morning by a search team, unconscious at the bottom of the rocky depression. The official report said I'd suffered from exposure and exhaustion, that I'd been talking to myself and showed signs of severe dehydration. They were half right. My voice was completely gone now, not just for singing, but for speaking too. The doctors said it was probably stress-related, that vocal cords damaged in childhood sometimes failed completely under extreme circumstances. They recommended therapy, suggested I might eventually recover enough to whisper. They were wrong about that part. I never spoke aloud again. But strange thing is, I didn't mind as much as you'd think. There's a kind of peace in silence, a way of hearing the world more clearly when you're not adding your own noise to it. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm doing my rounds through the park, I can still hear them. 3 faint voices harmonizing in the distance, keeping their promise to guard the mountain. I submitted my report about Devil's Backbone, recommending that the area be quietly restricted during October nights. I cited unstable rock formations and potential for accidents after dark. My supervisor approved it without question. He probably thought I was being overly cautious, but that was fine by me. The camper complaints stopped after that October. Word got around somehow, maybe through Mrs. Harper, maybe just through the mountain grapevine, that Devil's Backbone wasn't a good place for night hiking. Folks found other spots for their midnight adventures. I kept working as a ranger for another 15 years, communicating through notes and gestures, becoming something of a local legend myself. Silent Sam, they called me. The ranger who'd lost his voice saving lives. The stories grew in the telling, as mountain stories do, until some folks claimed I could speak to spirits and predict the weather by listening to the wind. Some of that wasn't far from the truth. I retired in 1978, but I still live in my cabin near Thornton Gap. Still keep my grandfather's pitch pipe in my shirt pocket, though I'll never blow another note through it. Sometimes young rangers stop by for advice about dealing with unusual incidents in the park. They never ask about Devil's Backbone directly, but I can see the questions in their eyes. I just smile and pour them coffees. and eventually they figure out that some silences are louder than words. These days, when the October nights turn cold and the leaves begin to fall, I sometimes walk up to the edge of Devil's Backbone Ridge. Not close enough to disturb anything, just near enough to listen. And if the wind is just right, I can still hear them. Grandpa Jesse and his two eternal companions, singing their watchful lullabies to keep an ancient hunger sleeping. Their harmony is perfect now, balanced and peaceful. 3 voices instead of 23, but somehow more complete than any choir I ever heard in life. They sing the old songs, Amazing Grace, Shall We Gather at the River, In the Sweet By and By. But they also sing new ones, songs I've never heard before but that sound like home. Sometimes I think about joining them. When my time comes, when my body finally gives out, maybe I'll walk up that rocky trail one last time and add my broken voice to their eternal music. Maybe then I'll finally learn to sing again in whatever key the dead prefer. But not yet. There are still hikers to watch over, still people who might wander too close to that hungry hollow on the wrong October night. And there are still stories to remember, even if I can't speak them aloud. Because some music is too beautiful for this world, and some prices are too high for any song. But the silence after song, that belongs to everyone. My name is Jerry Colefield, and I've been walking these Kentucky mountains for 23 years as a forest ranger. Started when I was just 22, right here in Daniel Boone National Forest. Back then, these hills were still wild in ways most folks couldn't imagine. I know every hidden trail, every cave, every spot where someone might think they can hide a still. See, I wasn't always on the law side of things. My family's been making moonshine in these mountains since before Kentucky was even a state. The Colefield name meant something around here. Meant quality whiskey that could knock a grown man flat. But that was before I learned what drinking could do to a family. Before I watched my daddy lose everything to the bottle, including my mama's love. Before I poured out the last batch from our family still and smashed every jar with a sledgehammer. That was 15 years ago, haven't touched a drop since. These days, my job is finding stills and shutting them down. Sounds simple, but it's not just about the law. These mountain families have been making shine for generations. It's in their blood, same as it used to be in mine. When I find an operation, I try to be fair about it, give warnings when I can. Help folks understand there are other ways to make a living. In 23 years, I've shut down 47 illegal operations. Know every moonshiner family in 3 counties. They respect me because I understand the trade, even if I'm on the other side now. Most of them, anyway. The Red River Gorge area is my main beat. It's perfect country for hiding stills, deep valleys, thick woods, caves everywhere you look. The limestone rock here has been carved by water for millions of years, creating hiding spots that most people never even know exist. I was checking one of those hidden valleys on a September morning when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountainsides in gold and red. Beautiful morning, perfect temperature, not a cloud in the sky. Should have been a good day. But something felt wrong from the moment I stepped into that valley. First thing I noticed was the quiet. These mountains are never truly silent. There's always birds, insects, squirrels rustling through the leaves. But this place was dead quiet, like someone had turned off all the sound. Second thing was the smell. Not the usual forest smell of leaves and earth. This was something chemical, sharp, and bitter, like copper pennies mixed with something rotten. I'd been following deer trails for about an hour when I found footprints in the mud near a creek. They were strange, the shape of old-fashioned boots, the kind my great-grandfather might have worn. Deep impressions, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy. The prints led straight toward a cliff face covered in thick vines. Nothing unusual there. Lots of caves in this area get hidden by plants. But as I pushed through the vines, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the shade. The cave mouth was bigger than I expected, tall enough for a man to walk through without ducking. But it was the temperature that really got my attention. Had to be 30 degrees cooler inside that cave than outside, and it wasn't natural cool. This was the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. I clicked on my flashlight and started walking deeper. The cave stretched back further than my light could reach, but I could hear something up ahead, a soft, bubbling sound, like water boiling. That's when I knew I'd found another still. But as I got closer, I realized this wasn't like any operation I'd seen before. The equipment was old, really old. The copper was green with age, covered in a patina that takes decades to develop, but it was running. Steam was rising from the still head, and clear liquid was dripping from the worm into a collection jar. Problem was, there was nobody around. No footprints except the old ones I'd followed. No fresh ashes in the firebox. No supplies, no food, nothing that showed anyone had been here recently. Yet the still was running like someone had just fired it up that morning. I stood there staring at that impossible sight, feeling the cold seep through my jacket. And for the first time in 15 years, I wanted a drink. I spent a good hour examining that still, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The craftsmanship was incredible, better than anything I'd seen in my years of breaking up operations. Whoever built this knew what they were doing, but the age bothered me. The copper had that green color you only get after years of weather and time. The stones around the firebox were blackened from what looked like decades of use. Even the wooden parts, the few that hadn't rotted away, were dark with age. Yet fresh moonshine was dripping from the worm. I pulled out my radio to call it in, but got nothing but static. Not unusual in these caves, the rock blocks signals. But something about that static felt wrong. It wasn't the normal crackling you get from interference. This sounded almost like voices, too faint to make out words, but definitely human. The smart thing would have been to leave right then, come back with backup and proper equipment. That's what I should have done. That's what I'd always done before. Instead, I found myself walking closer to the collection jar. The moonshine inside was crystal clear, clearer than any shine I'd ever seen. It didn't have the slight yellow tint that most homebrew has. This looked like pure water, except for the way it caught the light. It seemed to glow from inside, like it had its own light source. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to know what I was dealing with. Took a small sample bottle from my kit, the kind we use for testing water quality, and filled it from the collection jar. The liquid was cold, colder than the cave. Air. When I held the bottle up to my flashlight, I could see tiny swirls moving inside like smoke trapped in glass. That's when I made my first real mistake. I unscrewed the cap and took a smell. The scent hit me like a punch to the face. It wasn't the harsh alcohol smell of normal moonshine. This was sweet, almost floral, with hints of vanilla and something else I couldn't identify. Something that reminded me of Christmas morning when I was little, of my mother's cooking, of everything good I'd ever lost. Before I could stop myself, I tilted the bottle and let a single drop fall on my tongue. The world exploded. Suddenly, I wasn't in the cave anymore. I was standing in a colonial settlement, watching men in old-fashioned clothes loading barrels onto a wagon. The air was full of smoke and the sound of shouting. Someone was screaming. A man with wild eyes and a black beard was laughing as he poured liquid from a ceramic jug onto a pile of bodies. When he struck a flint, the bodies burst into flames that burned green and blue. "Finest batch yet," he said, and his voice seemed to come from inside my head. "Each soul makes it stronger." Then I was back in the cave, on my hands and knees, shaking like a leaf. The taste was still on my tongue, that impossible sweetness that made every other flavor in the world seem dull and lifeless. I don't know how long I stayed there trying to get my head clear. When I finally stood up, my legs felt weak. The cave seemed different somehow, like it had gotten bigger while I wasn't looking. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were coming from deeper in the cave, slow and steady. The same rhythm as the dripping from the still, but heavier, much heavier. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. The beam seemed weaker than before, like the darkness was eating the light, but I could see something moving just beyond the edge of the beam. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound official and in control. "This is Forest Ranger Coalfield. You're in violation of federal law." The footsteps stopped. Then I heard laughter. Not the kind of laughter you hear from a person. This was something else. Something that had learned to laugh by watching humans, but didn't quite get it right. "Jerry Coalfield," a voice said from the darkness. "Been waiting for you, boy." The voice was old, older than anything had a right to be. It had an accent I couldn't place, like English from a history book. And underneath the words, I could hear something else, a sound like wood burning, like fat dripping into fire. "Who are you?" I asked, but I was already backing toward the cave entrance. "Name's Ezekiel Blackheart," the voice said. "Used to live in these parts. Long time ago." Something stepped into my light. It looked like a man, mostly. Tall and thin, wearing clothes that belonged in a museum. His beard was black and wild, and his eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. But it was his skin that made my stomach turn. It looked burned, covered in blisters and scars that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at me. "You tasted my work," he said, grinning with teeth that were too white and too sharp. "What do you think? Finest moonshine these mountains ever produced." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The taste was still on my tongue, and part of me, the part that remembered the family business, wanted more. "That's impossible," I said. "You'd have to be dead?" He laughed again. "Oh, I am that. Been dead since 1755. But death's just another kind of business, Jerry, and business is good." He gestured toward the still, and I noticed his hands were burned worse than his face. The skin was black and cracked, showing red underneath. "Made a deal, you see. Right here, in this very cave. Traded my soul for the perfect recipe. Only catch was, I had to keep making it. Forever. One batch, one soul. My customers never complained." "That's not possible," I said again. But even as I said it, I was remembering the vision, the bodies, the green flames. "Possible enough," Ezekiel said. "Been making shine for 200 years now. Same recipe, same quality. Only problem is, I'm getting tired. Time for someone else to take over the family business." He took a step closer, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. "You got the knowledge, Jerry. Got the hands for it. And you got the thirst. Oh yes, I can smell the thirst on you. 15 years without a drink, but you still want it, don't you?" I tried to speak but couldn't, because he was right. Standing there in that impossible cave, listening to a dead man talk about moonshine, all I could think about was that single drop and how much I wanted another. "Just one sip," Ezekiel whispered. "One real taste. Then you'll understand." He held out a jar filled with that glowing liquid. And God help me, I reached for it. My hand stopped inches from the jar. Some part of my mind that was still working remembered why I'd quit drinking in the first place. Remembered my father's empty eyes, my mother's tears, the sound of glass breaking in the night. I jerked my hand back like I'd been burned. Ezekiel's face twisted with anger. "You can't fight it forever, boy. The taste is in you now. It'll call to you every day for the rest of your life." "Maybe," I said, backing toward the cave entrance. "But not today." I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear him laughing, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, even from inside my own head. By the time I reached the cave mouth, I was gasping like I'd run for miles. The sunlight felt like a blessing after the cold darkness of the cave. I stood there for a few minutes, letting the warmth soak into my bones, trying to convince myself that what I'd just seen wasn't real. But the taste was still on my tongue, and very few seconds, I'd catch myself thinking about that jar, about how the liquid had seemed to glow from within. I hiked back to my truck and drove straight to the ranger station thinking I'd file a report and get some help dealing with whatever was in that cave. But when I tried to write down what happened, the words wouldn't come. How do you put "met a dead moonshiner" in an official report? Instead, I spent the next few hours researching local history, looking for any mention of someone named Ezekiel Blackheart. Found him in the county records from 1755. Ezekiel Blackheart, age 34, hanged for the murder of 3 families in the Red River area. The record said he was a distiller who went mad, claiming he could make moonshine that would grant any wish. When people started dying after drinking his brew, the colonial authorities tracked him down and executed him. They burned his body and threw the ashes in the river, destroyed his still, and sealed the cave where he worked. Except they hadn't destroyed the still. It was still running, 270 years later. I went home that night thinking I'd never go back to that cave. Told myself it was just stress, maybe some kind of gas leak that caused hallucinations. People see strange things in caves all the time. But around midnight, I woke up with that taste in my mouth again. Sweet and impossible, making every other flavor seem like ash. I got up and drank a glass of water, then another, then another. Nothing helped. By morning, I was back in my truck, driving toward the Red River Gorge. I told myself I was going to destroy the still. That was my job, breaking up illegal operations. Didn't matter if the operator was alive or dead, legal was legal. But when I got to the cave, I found I wasn't alone. There were 3 hikers standing near the entrance, college kids by the look of them, with expensive gear and bright clothes. They were arguing about something. "I'm telling you, there's something in there," one of them was saying. "I can smell it." "Probably just a bear den," another replied. "We should leave it alone." The third one, a girl with blonde hair, was already pushing through the vines. "Don't be babies. It's just a cave." I should have stopped them. Should have used my authority as a ranger to order them away from the area. Instead, I found myself following them into the darkness. The still was running harder than before. Steam was pouring from the collection point, and the whole cave reeked of that impossible moonshine. But there was something else now, a smell like meat gone bad, like something rotting in the heat. The college kids found the still before I could warn them. "Holy crap," the blonde girl said. "Is that a moonshine still?" "Looks really old," said one of the boys, the nervous one. "Maybe we should report it." "Are you kidding?" said the third one, a big guy with a football player build. "This is like finding buried treasure. I bet this stuff is incredible." He walked straight to the collection jar and filled a plastic water bottle with the glowing liquid. "Don't," I said, finally finding my voice. But it was too late. He'd already taken a drink. For a second, nothing happened. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he started to convulse. His friends rushed to help him, but he was beyond help. Foam poured from his mouth, tinged with that same glow as the moonshine. He was dead in less than 30 seconds. The girl was screaming. The other boy was trying to do CPR on his friend, but the body was already going cold. Too cold, like all the heat had been sucked out of him at once. That's when Ezekiel appeared. He stepped out of the shadows like he'd been waiting there all along, grinning that horrible grin. "Waste of good shine," he said. "Boy didn't even appreciate it." The girl's screaming stopped abruptly. She was staring at Ezekiel with eyes so wide I could see white all around them. "Who?" she started to say. "Name's Ezekiel." He said pleasantly. "This is my operation. You're trespassing." The surviving boy, Tommy, I heard the girl call him, finally looked up from his dead friend. When he saw Ezekiel, he went, whiter than I thought was possible. "That's not real," he whispered. "That can't be real." "Real enough," Ezekiel said. He gestured toward the still. "Been making the finest moonshine in Kentucky for longer than you've been alive, longer than your great-great-grandfather was alive." "The boy's dead," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What did you do to him?" "Same thing I do to everyone who drinks my product," Ezekiel replied. "I collect payment." "Payment?" He grinned wider. "One shot, one soul. That's always been the deal." The dead boy's body was changing. The skin was taking on a gray color and his eyes had gone completely white. But worse than that, he was moving. Not alive moving. Something else. His limbs were twitching like puppet strings were pulling them. "Tommy," the girl whispered. "Tommy, get up, please. Get up." The thing that used to be Tommy sat up. When it looked at us, there was nothing human left in its face. Payment received, it said in a voice like breaking glass. Then it stood up and walked deeper into the cave, moving with jerky, unnatural steps. The girl fainted. Tommy, the living Tommy, just sat there, staring at the spot where his friend had been. "You're all insane," he said finally. "This isn't happening." "Happens every time," Ezekiel said. "Though I admit, most folks are a bit more careful about what they drink. College boys always were too eager for their own good." He turned to me. "But you, Jerry, you showed more sense. Didn't take but a drop. Makes you more valuable." "Valuable how?" "As a partner. See, I'm getting tired of this work. 2.5 centuries is a long time to spend in a cave. Time to retire. Let someone else handle the business end." "I'm not interested." "Oh, but you are." He held up another jar of that glowing liquid. "You've tasted it now. You know what it can do. One sip and you'll never want for anything. Hang again, money, power, respect, all yours for the asking." The worst part was he was right about the wanting. Standing there looking at that jar, all I could think about was how good that single drop had tasted, how it had made everything else seem pale and lifeless. "What's the catch?" I asked. "Just 1 batch a month. 1 soul per batch. Simple business. And if I say no?" His grin got wider. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life wanting what you can't have, thirsty for something that will never be satisfied. Trust me, boy, that's no way to live." I looked at the unconscious girl, at Tommy who was still staring at nothing, at the place where their friend had died. Then I looked at the jar in Ezekiel's burned hands, and I realized I was actually considering it. The craving was getting stronger. Standing there in that cold cave, listening to a dead man make his pitch, all I could think about was that taste. Sweet and perfect, like everything I'd ever wanted distilled into liquid form. "Think about it," Ezekiel said, his voice smooth as silk. "Your daddy never understood the business like you do, never had the knowledge, the respect. But you could be different. You could be the best." "My daddy died because of moonshine," I said. But my voice sounded weak even to me. "Your daddy died because he drank other people's product. Inferior goods. But this..." He held the jar higher, and the liquid inside seemed to pulse with its own light. "This is perfection. This gives power instead of taking it away." Behind him, I could see shapes moving in the deeper parts of the cave. More bodies, I realized. All the souls he'd collected over the centuries, trapped and serving him. Some still looked human. Others had changed into something else entirely. "How many?" I asked. "How many what?" "How many people have you killed?" He shrugged like it didn't matter. "Lost count after the first 100. "But they're not dead, Jerry. They're transformed. Made into something better than human." One of the shapes stepped into the light. It had been a woman once, maybe 50, years ago. Now her skin was gray as cavestone, and her eyes glowed with that same light as the moonshine. She moved like she was underwater, slow and graceful and wrong. "Tell him, Mary," Ezekiel said. "It's beautiful here," she said in a voice like wind through leaves. "No pain, no sadness, just the work. See?" Ezekiel turned back to me. "They're happy, happier than they ever were in life." The girl on the cave floor, the college student, was starting to wake up. She looked around confused for a moment, then saw Ezekiel and started to scream again. "Shut her up," he said casually. The thing that had been Mary moved toward the girl. I don't know what she was planning to do, but I couldn't let it happen. "Stop," I said, stepping between them. "Getting protective?" Ezekiel asked. "That's not very practical, Jerry. Girl's going to die anyway. They all do, eventually. At least this way, she'll serve a purpose. She's just a kid. So were most of my customers. Young folks always did have the strongest souls." Tommy, the surviving boy, finally seemed to wake up from his shock. He looked around the cave, taking in the still, the glowing liquid, the gray-skinned woman, and his face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on terror. "We have to get out of here," he whispered. "Nobody leaves," Ezekiel said. His voice had lost the friendly tone. Now it sounded like grinding stone. "Not until business is concluded." The temperature in the cave dropped another 20 degrees. Ice started forming on the walls, and my breath came out in white puffs. "You're going to take over the operation?" Ezekiel continued, looking at me. "Train the boy and girl as assistants. They'll be more useful alive, at least for a while. And if I refuse? Then they die anyway, and you spend eternity in here with the rest of us. But you'll never get to taste my product again. And you'll just want it forever." As if to prove his point, I felt the craving spike again. My mouth started watering, and my hands began to shake. The rational part of my mind was screaming that this was wrong, that no drink was worth human lives. But the rest of me was staring at that jar and thinking about how good just one sip would feel. "I can see it in your eyes," Ezekiel said. "The hunger. It's already taken root, Jerry. You can fight it for a while, but it'll just get stronger. Better to give in now and get something for your trouble." He held out the jar again. This time, I could smell it from 6 feet away, that impossible sweetness that made everything else seem like garbage. "Just one sip," he whispered, "to seal the deal." My hand moved toward the jar without my permission. The girl and Tommy were staring at me, probably wondering if the ranger was going to save them or damn them. Good question. I was wondering the same thing. The jar was cold in my hands. The liquid inside swirled like it was alive, and I could see faces in the patterns. All the souls Ezekiel had collected, trapped in his devil's brew. "That's it," he said. "One sip, and you'll understand everything." I lifted the jar to my lips. The smell was overwhelming now, blocking out every other sensation. All I had to do was tilt it slightly, and the greatest moonshine ever made would flood my mouth, my throat, my soul. Instead, I threw the jar as hard as I could at the copper still. Glass exploded everywhere. The moonshine splashed across the ancient metal, and where it hit, the copper began to smoke and hiss. The liquid itself burst into flames. Not normal fire, but those same green and blue flames I'd seen in my vision. Ezekiel screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was like metal tearing, like steam escaping from a boiler, like the death cry of something that should never have existed in Teon. He first place. "You fool!" he raged. "Do you know what you've done?" The fire was spreading. The wooden parts of the still caught first, then the walls of the cave itself. But these weren't ordinary flames. They burned cold instead of hot, and they were eating through solid rock like it was paper. "Run!" I yelled to Tommy and the girl. We didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the girl under one arm, Tommy took the other, and we stumbled toward the cave entrance as the supernatural fire spread behind us. Ezekiel and his collected souls weren't following. They were screaming, all of them, as the flames consumed everything they'd built over 2.5 centuries. We made it outside just as the cave began to collapse. The entire cliff face was coming down, sealing whatever was left of Ezekiel's operation under tons of rock and earth. The 3 of us sat there in the forest, breathing hard and trying to process what we'd just survived. The girl was crying. Tommy was shaking so hard I thought he might be having a seizure. "What was that?" the girl asked through her tears. "What happened to Jake?" Jake. That had been the dead boy's name. I'd have to remember that for the report I'd never be able to file. "Gas leak," I said finally. "Natural gas buildup in the cave. Can cause hallucinations, make you see things that aren't there. Your friend must have been overcome by the fumes." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that would let them sleep at night, the kind that would keep them from ending up in a psychiatric hospital. "But the man," Tommy said, "the burned man, and that woman." "Hallucinations," I repeated. "Gas does that, makes your brain show you things." I could see them trying to decide whether to believe me. Part of them wanted to. The alternative was too impossible to accept. "What about Jake's body?" the girl asked. I looked back at the collapsed cave. Nothing was getting out of there. Not Jake's body, not Ezekiel, not the souls he'd collected. "Buried under the rockfall," I said. "I'll call it in. Search and rescue will do what they can." But I knew there wouldn't be anything to find. That was 3 months ago. The official report listed Jake Morrison as a casualty of a natural gas explosion in an unstable cave system. His body was never recovered, which wasn't unusual in a rockfall that size. Tommy and the girl, her name was Sarah, seemed to be doing okay. I check on them sometimes, unofficially. They're seeing counselors, which is good. They still have nightmares, but they're starting to heal. They remember it as a gas leak. Most of the time, I try to remember it that way too. But the taste is still there. Ezekiel was right about that part. Every morning I wake up with that impossible sweetness on my tongue. Faint, but unmistakable. Every day I think about what it would be like to have just one more sip. Every night I dream about jars full of glowing liquid. I've been to 3 different doctors. They can't find anything wrong with me. The taste doesn't show up on any tests, doesn't have any physical cause they can identify. As far as medical science is concerned, it doesn't exist. But it's there, always there. I retired early, officially due to chemical exposure during the cave incident. The Forest Service was understanding about it. They gave me a nice pension and a commendation for quick thinking in a dangerous situation. Now I spend my time keeping an eye on the Red River Gorge area, watching for signs that something might be stirring under all that collapsed rock. So far, the area stays quiet. Whatever fire I set that day seems to have done its job. But sometimes, on still nights when the moon is dark, I swear I can hear something calling from deep underground, a voice like grinding stone promising me everything I've ever wanted in exchange for just one taste. I tell myself it's my imagination, that Ezekiel and his operation are gone forever, buried under tons of rock where they belong. Most of time, I even believe it. But I keep my truck's gas tank full, just in case. And I've started carrying a sledgehammer in the back, along with some other tools that might come in handy if I ever find another impossible still running where it shouldn't be. Because here's what I learned in that cold cave. Some thirsts can't be satisfied, and some deals are too good to be true. The mountains are full of secrets, and not all of them are meant for human eyes. I spent 23 years thinking I knew these hills. Turns out I didn't know anything at all. My name is Jerry Coalfield, and I used to be a forest ranger. Now I'm something else, a guardian maybe, or a watchman, keeping an eye on places where the old world bleeds through into the new. And if you're ever hiking in the Daniel Boone National Forest and you smell something sweet and impossible on the wind, something that makes your mouth water and your hands shake, turn around. Walk away. Don't look back. Some thirsts are meant to kill you. Trust me on that one. My name is John Bridgestone, and I've been a forest ranger in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest for 12 years now. I know these mountains like the back of my hand, every trail, every creek, every place where the rare plants grow. I have a PhD in botany, which sounds fancy, but really it just means I love plants more than most people love their pets. I moved out here after my divorce. Sarah and I had been together since college, but after 10 years of marriage, she said I cared more about my research than about her. Maybe she was right. When she left, I packed up my plant books and identification guides and headed for the mountains. The Forest Service was happy to have someone who could tell a rare orchid from a common weed. The Grandfather Mountain area became my specialty. It's remote up there. Sometimes I don't see another person for days. That's how I liked it. Just me, my notebooks, and thousands of plants that don't ask complicated questions or want things I can't give them. I've discovered 3 new plant species in my time here. Not big, flashy discoveries that make the news, but small wildflowers and ferns that scientists had missed. My supervisor, Rick, always joked that I had a green thumb and a plant whisperer's ear. If only he knew how true that would become. Most days I'd wake up in my cabin at dawn, make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and head out with my field bag full of collection tubes, cameras, and measurement tools. The forest was predictable in its beauty. Dogwoods blooming in spring, leaves turning gold in fall, everything following the natural order I'd studied for years. But in May of 1964, something changed. It started small, like most strange things do. I was checking on a patch of rare trilliums near Rocky Face Mountain when I noticed something odd. The flowers were blooming in perfect circles, not scattered randomly like nature usually does things, but arranged in neat rings like someone had planted them that way. I'd never seen anything like it. Trilliums are finicky plants. They grow where they want to grow, not where humans think they should. But here they were, dozens of them, forming 3 perfect circles about 6 feet apart. The inner circle had white flowers, the middle ring showed pink ones, and the outer ring bloomed deep red. I took pictures and made notes, trying to think of what could cause such a pattern. Maybe some kind of underground fungus network, or chemicals in the soil from old logging operations. I collected soil samples and flower specimens, planning to send them to the university lab. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those circles. In 12 years of botanical research, I'd never seen wild plants arrange themselves so perfectly. It bothered me like an itch I couldn't scratch. The next morning, I hiked back to the same spot. The circles were still there, but now there was something new. Right in the center of the innermost ring, a single flower had bloomed overnight. It was unlike anything I'd seen before. Petals that shifted from deep purple to silver depending on how the light hit them, and a scent that reminded me of the honeysuckle Sarah used to wear as perfume. I knelt down to examine it closer. The flower was perfect. No insect damage, no weather wear, like it had been protected by invisible hands. As I reached for my magnifying glass, a breeze picked up, and I could swear I heard something that sounded almost like laughter carried on the wind. Standing up, I looked around the forest. Everything seemed normal. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, sunlight filtering through the trees. But there was something different in the air, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I shook my head and got back to work. I was a scientist, not sage. Superstitious mountain man. There had to be a logical explanation for these flowers. There always was. But as I walked back down the trail that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in these mountains was watching me. And for the first time in 12 years, the forest didn't feel quite so safe. Over the next 2 weeks, the flower circles multiplied. Every few days, I'd find a new arrangement, sometimes in heart shapes, sometimes in spirals, always with that same impossible perfection. My soil samples came back from the lab showing nothing unusual. The flowers tested normal, too. Except for one thing that made no sense. They were all blooming out of season. I found spring beauty flowering next to fall asters, summer bergamot growing beside winter witch hazel. It was like someone had mixed up nature's calendar, and somehow it all worked together beautifully. The strangest part was how the arrangement seemed designed for me. The flowers were always positioned where I'd have the best view when I came around the bend in the trail. Camera angles were perfect. The scents were strongest right where I usually stopped to take notes. I started bringing my lunch to eat near the flower displays. The forest felt more alive somehow. Birds sang more sweetly. Butterflies seemed more colorful. Even the air tasted cleaner. For the first time since Sarah left, I felt something close to contentment. That's when I met her. I was photographing a new spiral of wild roses that had appeared overnight when I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. I turned around expecting to see another hiker, maybe a backpacker who'd gotten turned around. Instead, I saw the most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on. She was tall and graceful, with long brown hair that seemed to have tiny flowers woven through it. Her skin had a golden glow like she spent all her time in dappled sunlight, and her eyes were the exact green of new leaves in spring. She wore a simple dress that looked like it was made from soft moss and bark, and she moved so quietly I could barely hear her steps. "Beautiful work," she said, nodding toward the roses. Her voice was soft and musical, with an accent I couldn't place. Someone has quite the artistic eye. I wish I could take credit, I said, surprised to hear my own voice shake a little. But I'm just documenting them. I'm John, by the way. John Bridgestone, Forest Service. She smiled, and it was like watching the sun come up. I know who you are. I've been watching you work. You care for the plants like they're your children. Something about the way she said watching should have bothered me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt flattered. When was the last time anyone had paid attention to my work? I'm a botanist, I explained. These flowers, they're growing in impossible patterns. I can't figure out what's causing it. Maybe they're not caused by anything, she said, stepping closer. Maybe they're just happy. I laughed. Plants don't get happy. They respond to environmental conditions. Sunlight, water, soil chemistry. Don't they? She knelt down and gently touched one of the roses. As her fingers brushed the petals, the flower seemed to brighten, its color becoming more vivid. You've been alone up here a long time. Don't you think the forest notices? Don't you think it wants to give you something beautiful? The scientific part of my brain wanted to argue, but I found myself nodding instead. There was something about her that made impossible things seem reasonable. What's your name? I asked. Rose, she said, and I couldn't tell if she was joking. I live up in the high country. I don't get many visitors who appreciate the finer points of mountain ecology. We talked for an hour about plants and flowers. She knew things about local flora that I'd never read in any textbook, which mushrooms could cure headaches, which bark could ease a broken heart, which flowers bloomed only under the full moon. Every word she spoke made perfect sense, even when it shouldn't have. When she finally said goodbye, she walked back up the trail and seemed to fade into the green shadows like she'd never been there at all. But the roses she'd touched stayed bright and vivid, more beautiful than any flowers I'd ever seen. That night I dreamed about her voice and woke up feeling more rested than I had in months. The next day I hiked back to the rose spiral, hoping to see her again. The flowers were still there, but now they'd been joined by something new. A carpet of wild violets that spelled out a single word in flowing script. Welcome. I stood there staring at those purple letters, my hands shaking as I held my camera. Plants didn't spell words. They couldn't spell words. But there it was, clear as day, written in flowers that had definitely not been there yesterday. For the first time since I'd started finding the mysterious arrangements, I felt genuinely afraid. But it was the kind of fear that came mixed with excitement, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering what it would be like to fly. I took pictures from every angle, then sat down on a fallen log to think. There had to be a rational explanation. Someone else was out here, someone with a strange sense of humor and a talent for gardening. Maybe Rose knew who it was. Maybe Rose was doing it herself, though I couldn't imagine how she could work so quickly and precisely. As if summoned by my thoughts, she appeared on the trail again. This time, she carried a basket filled with wild berries that looked too perfect to be real. I thought you might be hungry, she said, offering me the basket. The berries were the sweetest I'd ever tasted, and they seemed to fill me with energy that lasted all day. Rose, I said carefully, did you make that word? With the violets? She smiled mysteriously. Would it matter if I did? It would matter to me. I'm trying to understand what's happening here. Understanding isn't everything, John. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life can't be explained, only experienced. She was right, of course. But as a scientist, I couldn't just let it go. I needed answers, even if part of me was afraid of what those answers might be. Rose started appearing more often. Every time I went into the high country, she'd find me, materializing from the forest like she'd been waiting just out of sight. We'd walk together, and she'd show me plants I'd never noticed before, hidden groves where wildflowers grew in impossible abundance. Under her guidance, I discovered medicinal properties that weren't in any of my reference books, leaves that could ease pain, roots that helped with sleep, berries that cleared the mind and sharpened the senses. I filled notebook after notebook with observations that would have revolutionized botanical medicine if I'd ever shared them with anyone. But I didn't share them. Something about Rose made me want to keep her secrets, to protect the magic she showed me from the outside world's harsh light. The flower messages became more frequent and more personal. I'd find my name spelled out in daisies, hearts made from red clover, entire poems written in different colored petals. They always appeared overnight, and they were always perfectly fresh, as if they'd just bloomed. One morning I found a message that made my heart race. "The mountain loves you, John. Do you love her back?" I stood there reading those words over and over, feeling something shift inside my chest. The mountain loved me. It sounded crazy, but after weeks of impossible flowers and mysterious beauty, crazy was starting to feel normal. That afternoon, Rose found me sitting by a stream, sketching wildflowers in my field journal. "You look troubled," she said, settling down beside me on the mossy bank. "I'm starting to see things that can't be there," I told her. "Flowers that spell words, plants that respond to my emotions. Yesterday, I swear a patch of ferns bowed when I walked by." "And that troubles you?" "Shouldn't it? I'm supposed to be a scientist. I'm supposed to deal in facts, not fairy tales." Rose reached over and took my pencil, adding delicate shading to my sketch that brought the flower to life on the page. Her touch was cool and soft, and I noticed that her skin had a faint green tinge, like sunlight filtering through leaves. "What if the fairy tales are just facts you weren't ready to understand?" she asked. "What if science only sees part of the truth?" I wanted to argue, but I found myself leaning closer to her instead. She smelled like wildflowers and rich earth after rain. When she looked at me, her green eyes seemed to hold depths I could get lost in. "The mountain does love you," she whispered. "Can't you feel it? The way the trees lean in when you pass? The way the flowers turn toward you like sunflowers follow the sun?" Now that she mentioned it, I could feel it. The forest had been embracing me for weeks, welcoming me in ways I'd been too rational to notice. Every day, the boundary between John the scientist and John the part of the forest grew thinner. "And what about you?" I asked. "Do you love me too?" She smiled and kissed me softly. Her lips tasted like honey and morning dew, and for a moment I forgot about everything else. My research, my old life, the questions that had been keeping me awake at night. When we broke apart, I noticed that the flowers around us had all turned to face our direction, as if they'd been watching. That night, I dreamed I was growing roots. Deep, strong roots that spread through the mountain soil, connecting me to every plant for miles around. I could feel their lives, their slow thoughts, their ancient patience. When I woke up, my sheets were covered with flower petals, though I had no memory of bringing any inside. The next few weeks blurred together like time-lapse photography. Rose and I spent every day together, exploring parts of the mountain I'd never seen. She showed me hidden waterfalls where orchids grew in impossible colors, caves filled with mushrooms that glowed in the dark, clearings where the grass grew in perfect geometric patterns. My supervisor, Rick, started leaving messages on my radio asking why I hadn't filed any reports lately. I ignored them. What could I tell him? That I was falling in love with a woman who might not be entirely human? That the forest was rearranging itself to make me happy? I stopped going back to my cabin some nights, sleeping instead in meadows filled with flowers that bloomed only in moonlight. Rose would lie beside me, her skin glowing faintly in the darkness, and tell me stories about the mountain's history. Stories that went back hundreds of years before any human had set foot in these hills. My reflection in the stream started looking different. My skin had taken on a greenish tinge, and sometimes I could swear I saw leaves growing in my hair. When I mentioned this to Rose, she just smiled and said I was becoming who I was always meant to be. The rational part of my mind tried to fight back. It whispered that I was losing myself, that I should return to civilization, file a report, get some help. But that voice grew weaker every day, drowned out by the songs the trees sang and the sweet scent of flowers that spelled out love letters in my path. One evening, as Rose and I sat watching the sunset from a cliff covered in blooming laurel, she turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, ancient and wild and hungry. "There's something I need to show you," she said. "Something important. But you have to promise me you'll keep an open mind." I promised. though part of me wondered what could possibly surprise me after everything I'd already seen. She led me deeper into the mountains than I'd ever gone, following paths that seemed to shift and change as we walked. The trees grew larger and older, their trunks twisted into shapes that looked almost like faces, and the flowers here glowed with their own light, and the air hummed with energy that made my skin tingle. Finally, we came to a clearing I'd never seen before. It was perfectly circular, surrounded by the biggest, oldest trees I'd ever laid eyes on. In the center grew a garden that took my breath away. Every flower I'd ever loved, every plant I'd ever studied, all growing together in impossible harmony. "Welcome to my home," Rose said. As she spoke, her appearance began to change. Her skin became more obviously green, bark-like patterns appeared on her arms, and her hair took on the texture of flowing moss. She was still beautiful, more beautiful than ever, but she was also clearly not human. "I am the spirit of this mountain," she said, her voice now carrying the sound of wind through leaves. "I have lived here for 1,000 years, tending the forest, nurturing the plants, waiting for someone who could truly appreciate the beauty I create. I should have been terrified. I should have run. Instead, I felt a deep sense of recognition, as if I'd always known this moment would come. "You're offering me a choice, aren't you?" I said. Rose nodded. "Stay with me, and live forever as part of this mountain. Help me tend the garden, share in the ancient wisdom of growing things, never know loneliness or heartbreak again. Or return to your old life, your reports and your laboratory, your world of facts that can never capture real beauty." I looked around the magical garden, felt the peace that seemed to radiate from every leaf and petal. Then I thought about my cabin, my job, the human world I'd left behind. It wasn't much of a choice at all. "I want to stay," I told Rose, and meant it. The words felt right as soon as I spoke them. "I want to be part of this." Her smile was radiant. "Then let the transformation begin." She led me to the center of the garden, where a circle of the most beautiful flowers I'd ever seen grew around what looked like a natural throne made of woven branches and blooming vines. As I sat down, the plants began to glow more brightly, and I felt something changing deep inside my body. My skin grew more green, my hair started showing streaks of brown and gold like autumn leaves. My fingernails hardened into something that looked like small thorns, and when I breathed, I could taste every flower in the garden. I felt stronger, more alive than I ever had as a purely human being. "This is what I've always wanted," I said, and Rose laughed with joy. But as the days passed in our magical garden, I started noticing things that bothered me. Rose would disappear for hours at a time, returning with stories about tending to the mountain's needs. When I asked to come with her, she always said I wasn't ready yet, that I needed to finish changing first. The garden was beautiful, but I realized I couldn't leave it. Whenever I tried to walk past the circle of ancient trees, my legs would grow heavy and my vision would blur. The flowers seemed to whisper warnings about the dangers of the outside world, how I might be hurt or killed if I ventured beyond the protection of the garden. One day, while Rose was away, I noticed something that chilled me. In a corner of the garden I'd never explored, I found a small grove of trees that didn't look quite natural. As I got closer, I realized why. They had human features. Faces pressed into the bark, hands reaching out from the branches, eyes that still held traces of intelligence and fear. I recognized one of them, Dr. Marcus Webb, a botanist from the university who disappeared in these mountains 3 years ago. The search teams had never found a trace of him, but here he was, transformed into a flowering tree, his mouth open in a silent scream. There were others, at least 6 trees that had once been men, all botanists or naturalists who'd come to study the mountain's plant life. Now they were part of Rose's garden, beautiful and terrible, trapped forever in wooden bodies. When Rose returned, she found me sitting beside Dr. Webb's tree, my hands shaking. "I see you found my other companions," she said calmly. "You turned them into trees," I whispered. "I gave them eternal life," she corrected. "They're part of the mountain now, part of something greater than their small human lives could ever have been. But they're trapped. They can't speak, can't move, can't choose. Neither can any plant, Rose said, her voice becoming cold. And yet they live. They grow. They experience beauty in ways humans never could. You will understand when your transformation is complete. For the first time since I'd met her, I was truly afraid. Not the exciting fear I'd felt when discovering the supernatural flowers, but deep, gut-level terror. I looked at my hands, already more plant than human, and realized that I was running out of time to choose a different path. What if I changed my mind? I asked. What if I wanted to go back to my old life? Rose's expression darkened. The flowers around us seemed to droop, and the air grew cold. You can't change your mind, John. You've already chosen. You've accepted my gifts, eaten my food, slept in my garden. The transformation can't be stopped now. But even as she said it, I could hear doubt in her voice. And I remembered something from my botanical studies. Even the most hardy plants had vulnerabilities. Every living thing had limits, conditions under which it couldn't survive. You're lying, I said, standing up on legs that felt more like roots than human limbs. If the transformation couldn't be stopped, you wouldn't be trying so hard to convince me it was a good thing. Rose's beautiful face twisted with anger. You ungrateful fool. Do you know how many men would kill for what I'm offering you? Immortality, perfect beauty, freedom from all human pain and loneliness? At the cost of everything that makes me human, I replied. My ability to choose, to leave, to be something other than what you want me to be. The garden around us began to change. The flowers grew larger and more aggressive, their petals sharp as knives. Vines started reaching toward me with obvious hostile intent. The tree men in the corner began to rustle and creak, as if Rose's anger was stirring them to some kind of action. You will stay, Rose said, her voice now carrying the deep rumble of earthquake and landslide. You will become what I need you to become. The mountain has chosen you, John. You cannot fight the mountain. But I was still partly human, still a scientist, and I'd spent 12 years learning about plants, including what could kill them. My field bag was still slung over my shoulder, containing the tools of my trade. Among them was a small bottle of concentrated herbicide I'd brought for clearing invasive species from research sites. I'd never used it. I preferred natural methods of plant management, but now it might be my only chance. Rose saw me reaching for the bag and raised her hand. Thorny vines shot up from the ground, wrapping around my arms and legs. But they moved too slowly. I was still partly human, still faster than plant reflexes. I pulled out the herbicide and uncapped it with my teeth. Stop! Rose screamed, her voice echoing off the mountains. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly, I said. I'm choosing to stay human. And I poured the poison onto the roots of the garden's central flower bed. The effect was immediate and terrible. Rose screamed as if I'd stabbed her, doubling over in pain as the herbicide spread through the connected root system of her magical garden. The glowing flowers began to wilt and blacken, their supernatural light flickering and dying. The tree men in the corner shuddered and began to change, bark peeling away to reveal the preserved bodies of the missing botanists. They were all dead, had been dead for years, but at least they were human again in death. Rose looked up at me, and with eyes full of rage and betrayal. You've destroyed everything, she gasped. 1,000 years of growth, of beauty, of perfect harmony. Gone. I had to, I said, though my heart was breaking. Even as the garden died around us, I could see how beautiful it had been, how much love and care had gone into creating it. I couldn't let you trap anyone else. She tried to reach for me, but her strength was failing as the poison spread through the interconnected root system she was part of. You don't know what you've done to yourself, she whispered. The transformation was almost complete. Without the garden to sustain you, the plant parts of you will die. You may not survive the change back. She was right. I could already feel it starting, a burning sensation in my veins as the plant elements in my body began to wither. My skin was returning to normal human color, but it felt like it was on fire. My enhanced senses were fading, leaving me feeling blind and deaf compared to what I'd become used to. Rose gave me one last look, sad and angry and something that might have been love, before crumbling into dust that scattered on the mountain wind. The ancient trees around the garden's edge toppled over, their supernatural life force exhausted. I barely made it back to my cabin. The transformation back to fully human took 3 days of fever and pain that left me weak as a newborn kitten. When it was over, I looked like myself again, but I retained some small changes. My eyes had flecks of green that hadn't been there before, my hair grew faster and thicker, and I could still sense the emotional states of plants, though not communicate with them like I had in Rose's garden. I filed my report to the Forest Service explaining that I'd been conducting an extended botanical survey in the high country. I didn't mention Rose, or the garden, or the missing botanists I'd found. Their bodies had turned to dust when the garden died, leaving no evidence of what had really happened to them. Rick accepted my story without question. He was just glad to have me back. In contact, I requested a transfer to a different region, claiming I needed a change of scenery for my mental health after the divorce. They moved me to urban forestry work in Charlotte, where the most supernatural thing I deal with is the occasional raccoon family living in park trees. But I still dream about her sometimes. In those dreams, the garden is alive again, and Rose is waiting for me with her ancient smile and her offers of eternal beauty. Sometimes I wake up with flower petals on my pillow, though I tell myself they must have blown in through the window. I've learned to live with the knowledge that there are things in this world that can't be explained by science, things that are beautiful and terrible and utterly beyond human understanding. The mountains still call to me, especially in spring when everything's blooming, but I stay in the city where it's safe, because I know now that some love is too perfect to be real and some gardens are too beautiful to leave alive. The mountain bride is still out there somewhere, still looking for lonely botanists who might be willing to trade their humanity for eternal beauty. I just pray she never finds another one as foolish as I was. The green in my eyes grows brighter every spring, and sometimes I wonder if the transformation was really as complete as I thought. Some nights I catch myself listening for the sound of flowers singing in languages older than words. I chose to stay human, but I'm not sure the choice was permanent. The mountain is patient, and love like that doesn't die easily. It just waits. My name is Rebecca Mountain Call, but everyone calls me Becky. I've been a park ranger here in Jefferson National Forest for 13 years now, and I thought I knew these mountains better than anyone alive. I'm not bragging when I say I'm fast, real fast. I've won the Virginia Trail Running Championship 3 times, and I hold the course record on 5 different mountain trails. Running isn't just my job, it's who I am. Every morning at 5 a.m. I lace up my boots and hit the trails before most people even think about getting out of bed. The Mount Rogers area is my territory, 500 square miles of the wildest, most beautiful country you've ever seen. I know every switchback, every creek crossing, every rocky outcrop where a hiker might slip and need help. My legs are covered in scars from thousands of miles on these trails, but I've never met a mountain path I couldn't handle. My cabin sits right at the edge of the wilderness, and from my front porch, I can see the ridgeline where the old Cherokee trails wind through the trees. On clear mornings, the mist rises from the valleys like smoke, and the whole world feels peaceful and right. That's what I used to think anyway. This morning started like any other. Coffee at 4:30, gear check at 4:45, out the door by 5 o'clock sharp. I was planning to run the Pine Mountain Loop, a tough 12-mile circuit that most people take 2 days to hike. I could do it in under 2 hours, easy. The June air was cool and sweet, full of that mountain smell. Pine needles, wildflowers, and something else I could never quite name. My headlamp beam cut through the pre-dawn darkness as I started up the first climb. My breathing settled into the steady rhythm I'd perfected over years of training. That's when I saw the first one. Just a flash of movement up ahead, maybe 50 yards. Someone else was on the trail, running fast, really fast, in 31 intervals. In years of dawn patrol runs, I'd maybe encountered 3 other people crazy enough to be out at this hour, and none of them could run like that. I picked up my pace, curious. The figure ahead looked strange, like they were wearing old-fashioned clothes, long pants instead of running shorts, and what looked like a heavy shirt. Not exactly smart trail running gear. "Hey," I called out, but got no answer. I'm competitive by nature. Always have been. When I see someone ahead of me on a trail, something inside me just has to catch up. So I pushed harder, my legs finding that smooth, powerful stride that had won me so many races. But the runner ahead didn't slow down. If anything, they seemed to speed up. Now, I know these trails like the back of my hand. The Pine Mountain Loop has some serious climbs. Steep, rocky sections where you have to watch every step or you'll trip and fall. But this person ahead of me was moving like the trail was flat pavement. They flowed over rocks and roots that should have slowed them down, never seeming to stumble or even break stride. After 20 minutes of trying to catch up, I was breathing hard. That never happened to me on a regular training run. My chest was burning and my legs felt heavy. But the runner ahead looked just as far away as when I'd started chasing them. Then something really weird happened. I rounded a sharp bend in the trail, expecting to see the runner maybe 30 yards ahead like before. But there was nothing. Just empty trail stretching up the mountainside. I stopped, hands on my knees, catching my breath. That was impossible. There was nowhere for them to go, just thick forest on both sides of the trail, too dense to push through quickly. And I'd only been maybe 10 seconds behind them around that bend. I looked for footprints in the soft dirt. Mine were there, clear as day, but I couldn't find any others, not a single track from the person I'd been chasing for half an hour. The sun was coming up now, filtering through the trees in golden shafts. Everything looked normal and peaceful. Birds were starting to sing. A squirrel chattered at me from a nearby oak tree. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I finished my run, but my heart wasn't in it. My mind kept going back to that impossible runner. Who runs mountain trails in old-fashioned clothes? Who moves that fast over rough terrain? And where do you disappear to when there's nowhere to go? Back at the ranger station, I checked the trail logs. No permits for early morning runs, no camping groups in that area. I even called the other rangers to see if anyone else had been out there. Nothing. That night, lying in my bunk, I kept thinking about what I'd seen. 13 years on these mountains, and I'd never experienced anything I couldn't explain. I was the practical one, the ranger who could fix anything, find anyone, solve any problem the wilderness threw at me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from those dark ridgelines, something that could run faster than anyone had a right to and disappear like morning mist. I told myself it was just another trail runner, someone I hadn't seen clearly in the dim light. Maybe they'd taken a side trail I'd missed. There had to be a logical explanation. There always was, right? 3 days later, it happened again. I was running the Devil's Backbone Trail this time, a nasty 5-mile ridge run with drop-offs that'll kill you if you're not careful. The trail is only about 3 feet wide in most places, with 1,000-foot drops on both sides. One wrong step and you're done. It was barely dawn, that gray time when the world's still deciding whether to wake up or not. My headlamp was doing its job, but just barely. That's when I saw not one runner, but 3. They were moving in single file about 100 yards ahead of me, running in perfect formation like some kind of military unit. Even from that distance, I could tell they were wearing the same weird old-fashioned clothes as the first one. Dark pants, heavy shirts, what looked like suspenders. What really got my attention was their speed. The Devil's Backbone is technical trail running at its worst. You have to watch every single step, test every rock before putting your weight on it. Most experienced runners slow to a careful jog through the dangerous sections. These 3 were flying. They moved like they could see in the dark, never hesitating, never slowing down. It was like watching ghosts float over the ground. I tried to catch up again. Same result. The harder I pushed, the further away they seemed to get. My lungs were screaming and my legs felt like rubber, but they stayed exactly the same distance ahead of me. Then I made a mistake. that almost got me killed. I was so focused on the runners ahead that I stopped watching the trail. My right foot came down on a loose rock at the edge of a particularly nasty drop-off. The rock shifted, and suddenly I was falling sideways toward a cliff that went down so far I couldn't see the bottom. Time slowed down like it does in those moments when you know you're about to die. I could see the rocks below, could feel myself tipping over the edge. My arms windmilled desperately, trying to find balance that wasn't there. That's when someone grabbed my wrist. Strong hands yanked me back from the edge and set me firmly on solid ground. I spun around to thank whoever had saved my life. Nobody there. I was alone on the ridge, heart hammering like a drum. The mysterious runners had vanished again, but this time they'd left something behind. The feeling of strong fingers wrapped around my wrist, and the fading scent of wood smoke and old wool. I sat down hard on the trail, shaking. Not from the near-death experience. I'd had plenty of those over the years. I was shaking because I knew, absolutely knew, that someone had pulled me to safety. I'd felt their grip, smelled their clothes, but there was no one there. When I got back to the station, I did something I'd never done before. I hit the history books. Jefferson National Forest has been protected land for almost 100 years, but people have been living in these mountains a lot longer than that. I dug through old maps, historical records, anything that might explain what I was seeing. What I found made my blood run cold. During the Civil War, these ridges had been used as courier routes. Messages between Confederate units, supply information, troop movements, all carried by runners who knew the mountain trails better than anyone. It was dangerous work. Union patrols were always trying to intercept the messages, and the terrain itself killed plenty of couriers. According to the records, at least a dozen message runners had died on these very trails. Falls, ambushes, exposure. The mountains didn't care which side of the war you were on. But one story stood out. In the summer of 1864, 3 Confederate couriers had been carrying what the records called critical intelligence along the ridge routes. They'd been spotted by Union cavalry and chased through the mountains for 2 days straight. The runners had made it almost to their destination, a Confederate camp about 10 miles from where I'd seen my mysterious trio, but they'd never arrived. Search parties found their bodies at the bottom of a cliff along the Devil's Backbone Trail. The message they'd been carrying was never delivered. I closed the history book and stared out the window at the darkening ridges. 3 runners moving impossibly fast through dangerous terrain, wearing old-fashioned clothes, disappearing without a trace. And they'd saved my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those figures running ahead of me in the gray dawn light. I kept thinking about the feel of those strong hands pulling me back from the cliff. Around midnight, I gave up, trying to sleep, and went out to the porch. The mountains were silver in the moonlight, peaceful and quiet. But as I watched, I could swear I saw movement along the ridge lines. Dark shapes flowing over the trails like water, never stopping, never resting, running towards something they could never reach. After that night, I started seeing them everywhere. Not every run, but often enough that I began to expect it. Dawn patrol on the Appalachian Trail. There they were, 3 figures in the distance. Evening maintenance run on the fire roads, glimpses through the trees. Even on my rest days, I'd catch sight of movement on the far ridges from my cabin window. Always the same 3 runners, always wearing those old-fashioned clothes, always just out of reach. I started timing my runs differently, trying to figure out their pattern. They appeared most often during bad weather, when fog rolled in thick from the valleys, or when summer thunderstorms turned the trails treacherous. It was like they only came out when conditions matched something they remembered. The more I researched, the more details I found. The 3 Confederate runners had names: James Morrison, age 19, Samuel Creek, age 22, William Duster, age 17. All of them local boys who knew these mountains like I did. All of them fast runners who'd volunteered for the dangerous courier work. The message they'd died trying to deliver was still in the Confederate archives. I drove all the way to Richmond to read it in person. It was intelligence about Union troop movements, information that could have prevented a devastating battle where hundreds of Confederate soldiers were killed in what turned out to be an ambush. Those 3 boys had died trying to save their friends, and they'd failed. That's when I started to understand what I was seeing. They were still running, still trying to deliver that message, still hoping they could make it in time to save lives that had been lost 120 years ago. My own running began to change during this time. I'd always been fast, but now I was getting faster. Impossibly faster. My morning times were dropping by minutes, not seconds. Routes that used to challenge me felt easy. I could run for hours without getting tired. At first, I thought it was just better training. But then, weird things started happening. During one run, I looked down at my GPS watch and saw I'd covered 8 miles in what felt like 20 minutes. The watch had to be broken. But when I checked it against the mile markers on the trail, it was right. Another time, I was running through a section of trail I'd done thousands of times before. But instead of the familiar pine trees and rocky outcrops, I saw something impossible. Canvas tents scattered through a clearing, men in gray uniforms sitting around campfires, horses tied to picket lines. I blinked, and it was gone. Just normal forest again. But I could still smell the wood smoke, could still hear the faint sound of voices carried on the wind. The 3 phantom runners started appearing closer to me. Not ahead on the trail like before, but running alongside me. I could see them clearly now, young faces, determined expressions, clothes that looked hand-sewn and well-worn. They never looked directly at me, but I knew they were aware I was there. One morning, I decided to try something crazy. Instead of trying to catch up to them, I tried to match their pace exactly, to run with them instead of chasing them. It worked. Suddenly I was part of their formation, 4 runners moving in perfect sync along the ridge trails. And for the first time, the phantom runners acknowledged my presence. The one in front, I thought it was James Morrison, based on the historical descriptions, turned his head slightly and nodded at me. His eyes were sad but determined. Then he did something that made my heart skip. He handed me something. It was an old leather message pouch, worn smooth by years of handling. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellow with age. Even without opening it, I knew what it was. The message that had never been delivered. As soon as I took the pouch, the world around me changed. The modern trail vanished, replaced by a narrow dirt path winding through different trees. The mountains looked the same, but younger somehow. The air smelled of wood smoke and horses and something else. Fear. I was running through 1864. The phantom runners were speaking to me now, their voices like wind through dry leaves. "Help us," James Morrison whispered as he ran. "We're so close to saving them." "The message," Samuel Creek added. "It has to get through." "They're all going to die if we don't make it," William Duster said, and his young voice broke with desperation. I understood then what they wanted from me. They needed someone living, someone who could exist in both their time and mine to finish what they'd started. They'd been running these mountains for over a century, trying to complete their mission, but they were trapped in the moment of their failure. They needed me to succeed where they had failed. The message pouch felt heavier than it should, weighted down with the hopes of dead soldiers and the guilt of a mission left undone. As I ran with the 3 phantom couriers through the ghostly landscape of Civil War-era Virginia, I realized my whole life had been leading to this moment. I was going to try to deliver a message that was 120 years too late. But first, I had to survive a run that had already killed 3 people. The trail ahead disappeared into darkness, and I could hear the sound of pursuing horses somewhere behind us. The phantom runners picked up their pace, and I stayed with them, the leather pouch bouncing against my hip with each stride. Time was running out. It had been running out for over a century. The Civil War landscape lasted until dawn broke fully, across the mountains. Then, like someone switching off a movie projector, I was back on the familiar modern trail. But the message pouch was still there, solid and real against my hip. The 3 phantom runners had faded with the ghostly vision, but I could still feel their presence. They were waiting, watching, hoping I could do what they couldn't. I ran home and carefully opened the message. The paper was so old it almost crumbled at my touch. The writing was faded but readable. Union forces moving to surround Confederate position at Willow Creek. Attack planned dawn June 23rd. Estimate 500 enemy troops with artillery. Recommend immediate withdrawal to defensible position. Time critical. Captain J. Matthews, Intelligence. June 23rd, 1864. The day the 3 runners had died. The day hundreds of Confederate soldiers had walked into an ambush because they never got the warning. I spent the next week researching everything I could about that battle and the route the runners had been taking. Their destination was clear, a Confederate camp that had been located where the modern town of Damascus sits today, about 15 miles from where their bodies were found, following the old ridge trails. It was an impossible run. The terrain was brutal even by today's standards, and they'd been trying to do it while being chased by cavalry. No wonder they'd died. But maybe, just maybe, I could finish it. The more I thought about it, the more obsessed I became. These weren't just random ghosts. They were soldiers who died trying to save their friends. They'd been running for over a century, trapped in their failure, desperate to complete their mission. If I could somehow deliver that message to its intended destination, maybe I could set them free. I know how crazy that sounds. Believe me, I spent plenty of time wondering if I was losing my mind. But every morning when I went out for my runs, they were there. James, Samuel, and William running their eternal race against time, carrying the weight of all those soldiers who died because the warning never came. I had to try. I chose the anniversary, June 23rd. If there was ever going to be a time when the past and present might touch, it would be on the exact date of their deaths. I started the run at 3 a.m., the same time the historical records said the 3 couriers had begun their final journey. The message pouch was strapped securely to my waist. I'd plotted the route using a combination of old maps and modern trail guides, 15 miles of the most difficult terrain in Virginia. For the first hour, I ran alone, just me and my headlamp and the familiar sounds of the night forest. But as the sky began to lighten, I felt them join me. The phantom runners materialized out of the pre-dawn mist like they'd been waiting. This time, though, something was different. They looked more solid, more real, and behind them I could see others, dozens of ghostly figures in Confederate gray, watching from the ridgelines. All the soldiers who'd died in the ambush, all waiting to see if their warning would finally get through. The run became something beyond physical endurance. My body was moving at speeds that should have been impossible, covering ground in ways that defied everything I knew about human limitations. But it came with a price. With each mile, I felt parts of myself being left behind. My connection to the present, to my normal life, was stretching thinner and thinner. The 3 runners stayed with me the whole way, sometimes visible, sometimes just voices in the wind. They told me their stories as we ran, about their families back home, their fears, their hopes that the war would end soon. They'd been just boys, really, caught up in something bigger than they could understand. We almost made it, James Morrison told me as we crested a particularly brutal climb. So close, could see the campfires in the distance. That's when the cavalry caught up, Samuel Creek added. Forced us off the main trail, up onto the Devil's Backbone. Knew it was dangerous, William Duster said quietly. But we had to try. Had to get the message through, and the final 3 miles were the hardest. My body was screaming in protest, running on reserves I didn't know I had, but the phantom runners were getting brighter, more solid, as if my effort was somehow feeding their existence. As we approached Damascus, or where the Confederate camp would have been in 1864, the world began to shift again. Modern buildings faded away, replaced by rows of canvas tents and cooking fires. Soldiers in gray uniforms were just beginning to stir in the pre-dawn light, preparing for what they didn't know would be their last day alive. I stumbled into the camp, legs finally giving out, and fell to my knees in front of a tent marked with officers' insignia. A man emerged, tall, bearded, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much war. "I have a message," I gasped, pulling the leather pouch from my belt. "From Captain Matthews, about the ambush at Willow Creek." The officer took the message and read it quickly. His face went white. "Sound the alarm," he shouted. "Break camp immediately. We're pulling back to the mountain positions." Around me, the camp exploded into activity. Soldiers grabbed their gear. Officers shouted orders. Horses were quickly saddled. In less than an hour, the entire Confederate force was moving away from Willow Creek, away from the trap that would have killed them all. As the last of the soldiers disappeared into the mountain trails, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see James Morrison, but he looked different now. Peaceful. Relieved. His two companions stood beside him, and they were all smiling. "Thank you," James said simply. "We can rest now." The three phantom runners began to fade as the sun rose fully over the mountains. But before they vanished completely, William Duster said something that chilled me to the bone. "You delivered the message, but now you have to find your way back, and that's not going to be easy." As the Civil War camp disappeared around me, I realized what he meant. I was alone in the wilderness, 15 miles from home, and my body was shutting down from the supernatural exertion. My legs wouldn't work properly. My vision was blurring, and I could feel something fundamental breaking inside me. I'd saved the ghost soldiers. But I wasn't sure I'd saved myself. I don't remember much about getting home. Bits and pieces, crawling down rocky slopes, drinking from mountain streams, the sun getting higher and hotter as I struggled through terrain that had been easy when I was running with supernatural help. A hiking family found me collapsed on a trail about 5 miles from the ranger station. They said I was unconscious, badly dehydrated, and mumbling about messages and cavalry. The rescue team had to carry me out on a stretcher. I spent 3 days in the hospital. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. My legs showed signs of extreme overuse, muscles torn, tendons strained, joints inflamed like I'd run 100 miles instead of 15. But there was something else, something they couldn't measure or treat. I felt hollow inside, like part of me had been left behind in 1864. When I finally got back to my cabin, the first thing I did was check the historical records again. I needed to know if what I'd experienced was real or just some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. What I found made me cry. The records showed that on June 23, 1864, Confederate forces at Willow Creek had received intelligence about a planned Union ambush. They'd withdrawn to defensive positions in the mountains, avoiding what military historians called certain annihilation. Hundreds of lives had been saved. But the official records also showed something else. 3 Confederate couriers, James Morrison, Samuel Creek, and William Duster, had been found, dead at the bottom of Devil's Backbone Cliff that same morning. They'd apparently made it through with their message before dying in the attempt. History had been rewritten. The 3 phantom runners were finally at peace. As for me, I never ran the same again. The supernatural speed was gone, along with whatever had been allowing me to push my body beyond normal human limits. Worse, my legs were permanently damaged from that final run. The doctors said I'd never compete again, probably never run long distances without pain. I had to take a desk job at the ranger station. No more dawn patrol runs, no more backcountry rescues. Just paperwork and radio calls in the view of mountains I could no longer explore the way I used to. Some nights, when the moon is full and the mist rises from the valleys, I still see runners on the distant ridges. But they're different now. Modern trail runners, hikers, people enjoying the mountains the way they're supposed to be enjoyed. The phantom runners are gone. Their mission is complete. I keep the old leather message pouch on my desk as a reminder. It's empty now, but sometimes when I touch it, I can still smell wood smoke and hear the faint sound of voices carried on the mountain wind. Young voices, finally at peace. Was it worth it? Giving up everything I loved, my speed, my strength, my life in the wilderness, to deliver a message that was 120 years too late? I think about those hundreds of Confederate soldiers who lived because they got their warning. I think about their families, their descendants, all the lives that continued because 3 ghost runners never gave up hope. Some messages are worth any price, but you better be sure you're ready to pay it. These days, I tell hikers and trail runners about the history of these mountains, about the courage it took to carry messages through dangerous territory, about how the past never really leaves us, especially in places where strong emotions have soaked into the very ground. I don't tell them about the phantom runners. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway. But sometimes when I'm talking to a particularly fast, particularly dedicated trail runner, I notice them looking up at the ridgelines with a strange expression, like they've seen something moving up there, something that shouldn't be possible. When that happens, I just smile and suggest they be careful on the early morning runs. The mountains have their own way of testing people, I tell them, and some tests change you forever. The ridge runners are at rest now, but the mountains are still full of stories, still full of spirits who have unfinished business with the living world. Just remember, if something impossible starts following you on the trail, there's probably a reason, and that reason might be more important than anything you've ever done in your life, even if it cost you everything to find out what it is. My name is Bill Crowfeather, and I've been keeping these Cherokee lands safe for 17 years now. Started this job right after I got back from the war in the Pacific. Saw enough violence over there to last me 3 lifetimes. When I came home in 1932, all I wanted was peace and quiet in the woods where I grew up. The Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee is my beat. Every ridge, every stream, every game trail. I know them all like the lines on my grandmother's weathered hands. She raised me after my parents died, taught me the old Cherokee ways alongside the new American ones. Half my blood runs Cherokee, half runs Irish from my father's side. Used to think that made me caught between 2 worlds. Now I know it does. Grandmother told stories about these mountains that would make your hair stand up. Tales about spirits that walked the ridges, about hunters who never came home, about things that watched from the darkness between the trees. I listened politely when I was young, but after I learned to read and went to school, I figured they were just old stories. Made-up tales to scare children into behaving. Should have listened better. My job keeps me busy, especially during hunting season. I check licenses, make sure folks follow the rules, and help out when someone gets lost or hurt. Process over 1,000 hunting permits every year. Know every hunter who comes through these parts. The good ones who respect the land and the fools who think the forest owes them something. Most hunters are decent people. They understand that taking a life, even an animal's life, means something. They use what they kill, say a prayer, show respect. But every year I run into a few who see hunting as nothing but sport. They wound more than they kill, waste good meat, and leave their trash scattered through the woods like they own the place. Those are the ones who've been having trow. Blee lately. Started getting reports 3 weeks ago. Experienced hunters coming back from the deep woods looking pale and shaky. Said they felt like something was watching them, following them. These weren't city boys on their first hunt. These were men who'd been tracking deer through these mountains since they could walk. Something ain't right out there, Bill, old Tom Henderson told me after his last hunting trip. Tom's been hunting these ridges for 40 years. His hands shook as he poured coffee from his thermos. Felt like I was being hunted instead of hunting. I figured it was just nerves. Maybe a bear or mountain lion had moved into the area, making folks jumpy. But then Jake Morrison came to see me, and Jake doesn't scare easy. Bill, I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I'm crazy, Jake said. He sat on the edge of my desk at the ranger station, turning his hunting cap around and around in his hands. I was up on Lookout Ridge 2 nights ago. Had a clear shot at a big buck, maybe 10 points. But when I looked through my scope, there was something else in the tree line. Something big. Something watching me watch the deer. What kind of something? I asked. Jake's eyes went distant. Looked like a man, but too big to be a man, and it had eyes that caught the moonlight like an animal's. He shook his head. When I looked again, it was gone, but I felt it watching me all the way back to my truck. I wrote up a report about possible wildlife encounters and sent it to the main office. Standard procedure. But that night, lying in my cabin, I found myself thinking about grandmother's stories, about the things she called Kekla Kudla, the hunter that hunts the hunters. Every Cherokee knows that story, she told me years ago, her voice soft in the firelight. Long ago, there was a warrior who broke the sacred hunting laws, killed without respect, wasted what the Great Spirit provided. The spirits cursed him to hunt forever, never satisfied, never at peace. When the hunting moon rises, he walks the old paths, watching for others who forget the sacred ways. Just old stories, I'd told myself then. But now, with reports coming in every few days about something stalking hunters in my forest, those stories didn't seem so made up anymore. The worst part was the pattern. Every single report came from the same area, the Tellico River watershed, the old Cherokee hunting grounds that my grandmother's people had used for hundreds of years. And every sighting happened during the full moon. Next full moon was in 5 days. The call came in at 4:30 in the morning. Phone rang so loud it nearly launched me out of bed. On the other end was Sheriff's Deputy Mark Collins, and he sounded like he'd been awake all night. "Bill, you need to get up to Bald River Falls fast as you can. We got a situation." I pulled on my clothes and drove the winding mountain roads in the pre-dawn darkness. My headlights cut through fog that hung between the trees like ghostly fingers. By the time I reached the falls, the sun was just starting to peek over the ridges, painting the mist golden. Collins met me at the trailhead. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. "Hunter named Eddie Patterson went missing 2 days ago," Collins explained as we hiked toward the falls. "His wife called when he didn't come home. We found his truck at the parking area, all his gear still inside except his rifle." "Maybe he fell, hit his head," I suggested. But Collins shook his head. "That's what we thought too, until we found him." Eddie Patterson was hanging 30 feet up in an old oak tree. Not hanging like he'd fallen and gotten caught, hanging like someone had put him there on purpose. His rifle lay at the base of the tree, the barrel twisted into an impossible knot. "How the hell does someone get a man that size up in a tree?" Collins asked. Eddie was a big guy, maybe 250 pounds of muscle and fat. "And how do you twist a rifle bar? Well, like that?" I stared up at Eddie's body swaying in the morning breeze. Something cold crawled up my spine. "Any signs of what killed him?" "That's the strangest part. Doc says he died of fear. Heart just stopped. No injuries, no violence. Just scared himself to death." I walked around the base of the tree looking for tracks. Found them pressed deep in the soft earth near the creek. Footprints twice the size of a man's with what looked like claw marks at the toes. But strangest of all, the prints showed bare feet, human-shaped but massive. "Collins, you see these tracks?" He came over and whistled low. "What kind of animal makes tracks like that?" "No animal I know." I knelt down and measured the print with my hand. 16 inches long, 6 inches wide. But they look almost what? Almost human. We followed the tracks along the creek for maybe 100 yards before they disappeared into the rocky stream bed. But I found something else that made my blood run cold. Scratches carved into the bark of trees along the trail. Not random scratches from claws or antlers. Deliberate marks, symbols, Cherokee symbols. I recognized them from the stories grandmother used to tell. Warnings, messages, ancient writing that said, "Beware, the hunter comes for those who show no respect." Collins was examining Eddie's twisted rifle. "Bill, this doesn't make sense. Steel doesn't bend like this, not without machinery, not without heat." I walked back to where Eddie's body hung in the tree. The rope around his neck wasn't rope at all. It was woven from vines and twisted bark, done in a pattern I'd seen before in grandmother's stories. The way the old Cherokee used to prepare offerings for the spirits. "We need to get him down," I said. It took 3 men and a ladder to lower Eddie Patterson's body. As we worked, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. Eddie's huoas, haunting jacket was soaked with blood, not his own blood, but the blood of animals. Fresh blood, like he'd been field dressing a dozen deer. But there were no deer carcasses anywhere around. Collins, Eddie's wife say anything about him having a successful hunt? Matter of fact, she mentioned he'd been bragging about killing 6 deer in 2 days. Said he was planning to sell the meat. 6 deer in 2 days. The legal limit in Tennessee is 1 deer per day during hunting season. Eddie Patterson had been poaching and doing it on sacred Cherokee land. As we loaded the body into the coroner's van, I heard something that made me stop cold. A sound drifting down from the ridges above us. A long, mournful call that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. Like a war cry mixed with the howl of a wolf. Collins heard it too. What the hell was that? I looked up at the tree line and thought I saw a shadow moving between the trunks. Something tall and broad-shouldered that seemed to flow from tree to tree without making a sound. Probably just wind in the trees, I said, but my hand moved instinctively to the service pistol on my belt. That night I visited my grandmother's grave behind the old Cherokee church, knelt down beside her headstone, and spoke to her like she was still sitting in her rocking chair. Grandmother, I think the old stories are true. I think Kekla Kudle is walking again. What am I supposed to do? The wind through the pines sounded almost like her voice. Remember what I taught you, grandson. Some laws are older than the ones written in books. Driving home, I passed 3 more hunters heading into the forest for night hunting. Legal during bow season, but these men had rifles and spotlights. Poachers, most likely, coming to take advantage of the confusion around Eddie's death. I should have stopped them, should have checked their licenses and equipment. Instead, I drove home and loaded my grandfather's old Winchester with silver bullets that grandmother had blessed with Cherokee prayers 50 years ago. Some instinct told me I was going to need them. The next 2 nights brought 3 more bodies. First was Danny Kowalski, found at dawn hanging upside down from a bridge over Little River. Like Eddie, he'd died of fear, and like Eddie, his hunting rifle was twisted into scrap metal. But Danny's case was worse. His body was arranged like a traditional Cherokee offering, surrounded by the bones and antlers of dozens of animals. All the deer he'd killed illegally over the past month by the look of it. The second was Lou Martinez, discovered by hikers near Cataract Falls. Lou had been suspended in a web of vines between 2 trees 40 feet off the ground. His clothes were shredded, and his body was painted with symbols in what looked like mud and blood. Cherokee war paint, grandmother would have called it. The pattern meant marked for judgment. The third was the worst. Brothers Pete and Carlos Hoffman, found at their illegal hunting camp deep in the Tellico wilderness. Their campsite looked like a battlefield. Trees were scored with claw marks 20 feet high. Their truck was flipped upside down and crushed flat. And the brothers. The brothers had been arranged sitting around their campfire, positioned like they were having a friendly conversation. But their eyes were gone, replaced with smooth river stones. Their mouths were stuffed with the meat they'd been smoking, venison taken from pregnant does. Collins met me at the scene with 6 state troopers and a crime scene team. Everyone was talking about serial killers and drug cartels, but I knew better. "Bill, this is getting out of hand," Collins said as we watched the coroner's team work. 5 men dead in 3 days. Whatever's doing this, we need to find it fast. I showed him the tracks around the campsite, the same massive, clawed human footprints. But now there were dozens of them, like a whole tribe of whatever was hunting had gathered, for some kind of ceremony. "Collins, you need to close the forest, put out a hunting ban until we figure this out." "Can't do that. Hunting season brings in too much money for the county. Besides, the state boys think it's just some crazy mountain man, maybe hopped up on drugs. They'll catch him." I walked to the edge of the camp, where the forest began. Carved into a massive oak tree was a message in Cherokee symbols. 5 who showed no respect have paid the price. More will follow until balance is restored. Below the message was something that made my hands shake. My own name, written in Cherokee script. The hunters were looking for me specifically. That night, I sat in my cabin cleaning my grandfather's Winchester and trying to make sense of what was happening. 5 dead hunters, all of them poachers, all of them killed on sacred Cherokee land during the full moon cycle. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew the old stories. Kekla Kudle was real, and he was cleaning house. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on my front porch. Slow, deliberate steps that made the old boards creak. But the steps were too far apart, too heavy. Whatever was walking out there had legs longer than any humans. I grabbed the Winchester and moved to the window, pulled back the curtain just enough to see out. A shadow stood at the edge of my porch, tall as the roof, broad as a bear, but shaped like a man. In the moonlight, I could see its face. Cherokee features, but ancient and weathered like carved stone, eyes that glowed with their own cold light, and around its neck, a necklace made of human teeth and animal bones. Kekle-Kudla, the eternal hunter, just like grandmother had described in her stories. It spoke to me in Cherokee, words I hadn't heard since childhood but somehow understood. William Crowfeather, son of two peoples, you have been chosen. Chosen for what? I whispered through the glass. To restore balance, to remember the old laws, to stand between the world of spirits and the world of men. I watched as it raised one massive hand and pointed toward the deep forest, toward the ancient Cherokee hunting grounds where my grandmother's people had hunted for 1,000 years. Come to the sacred place when the moon is highest. Come alone. Come ready to choose which laws you will serve. Then it melted back into the shadows like it had never been there at all. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my rocking chair, Winchester across my knees, thinking about grandmother's words. She'd always said I was meant for something special, caught between the Cherokee world and the white world for a reason. Now I was starting to understand what that reason might be. 3 more hunters had gone into the forest that evening, ignoring all the warnings and roadblocks. Radio chatter suggested they were heading for the old, sacred hunting grounds, probably planning to take advantage of all the chaos to do some serious poaching. If Kekle-Kudla found them first, they'd end up like the others, arranged like offerings, twisted into symbols of ancient justice. Unless I got there first. I checked the silver bullets in the Winchester and headed into the forest. Time to see if I was Cherokee enough to talk to a legend, and human enough to survive the conversation. The sacred hunting ground lay in a natural bowl between 3 ridges, hidden so deep in the Cherokee National Forest that most maps didn't show it. Grandmother had brought me here once when I was 12, told me it was where her grandfather's grandfather had performed the first hunt ceremony each season. I reached the clearing just as the full moon crested overhead. The 3 poachers were already there, spotlights blazing, moving through the sacred grove like they owned it. I recognized them. The Dawson brothers and their cousin Mickey, all of them known for taking deer out of season and leaving the meat to rot. "Hey, you boys need to get out of here," I called as I approached. Ched their camp. Forest's closed due to ongoing investigation. The oldest Dawson brother, Earl, turned his spotlight on me. "Says who? You ain't got jurisdiction to close nothing, Ranger. This is public land." "Says the thing that's been killing hunters for the past week," I replied. "Unless you want to end up hanging in a tree like Eddie Patterson." The brothers laughed, but I could see they were nervous. They'd heard the stories, seen the news reports. Their rifles were loaded and ready, and they kept glancing at the tree line. "Ain't nothing out here but scared animals and scared people," Earl said. "We're gonna get us some deer and get out." That's when the temperature dropped 30 degrees in 3 seconds. Our breath started misting in the air. The batteries in their spotlights began to dim. And from the forest around us came a sound like distant drums, the rhythm of Cherokee war chants from centuries past. "What the hell?" Mickey whispered, raising his rifle. The trees began to move without any wind. Branches swayed and creaked, forming patterns that looked almost like dance movements. And in that swaying forest, shadows began to take shape. Not just one shadow, but dozens. Cherokee warriors, translucent as moonbeams, emerged from between the trees. They carried ancient weapons, bows, tomahawks, spears tipped with flint. Their faces were painted for war, their eyes glowing with the same cold light I'd seen on my porch. At their head walked Kekle-Kudla. In the clearing, surrounded by his ancestors, the eternal hunter looked even more massive than before. 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered as a bear, but moving with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. His skin was dark copper, marked with scars from 1,000 hunts. His hair was long and black, woven with feathers and bones. Around his waist hung a belt made from the hides of animals that had died with honor. The Dawson brothers opened fire. Their bullets passed right through the ghostly warriors like they were shooting at mist. But Kekle was solid enough. The bullets struck him in the chest and shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. Silver streaks of light marked where the bullets hit, and I realized the poachers were using some kind of blessed ammunition. Kekle roared, a sound that shook the ground and sent every animal within miles running. The ghostly warriors raised their weapons and charged. What followed was like watching a battle from a nightmare. The Cherokee spirits moved through the clearing like deadly smoke, and everywhere they touched, the poachers' equipment failed. Rifles jammed, spotlights exploded. Even their truck's engine died with a mechanical scream. Earl Dawson ran straight toward me, his eyes wild with panic. "Shoot them, Ranger! Shoot them!" I raised the Winchester but didn't fire. Something in grandmother's blood told me this wasn't my fight. Mickey screamed as ghostly hands lifted him off the ground. He hung suspended in the air, his body rigid with terror. I watched his face go from red to white to blue as his heart simply stopped from fear. The youngest Dawson brother, Tommy, fell to his knees and began praying in a voice high as a child's. The Cherokee spirits gathered around him but didn't touch him. Instead, they seemed to be waiting for something. Kekle approached me across the clearing. The bullet wounds in his chest were already healing, silver light sealing the tears in his supernatural flesh. "William Crowfeather," he said in Cherokee, "you carry the blood of the people, but you serve the laws of the destroyers. Choose now. Will you stand with those who take without respect, or will you remember the old balance?" I looked around the clearing. Mickey Dawson hung dead in the air, suspended by forces I couldn't understand. Earl Dawson cowered behind an overturned log, his rifle useless in his shaking hands. Tommy knelt in the center of it all, surrounded by the spirits of my ancestors. And I understood what was happening. This wasn't just about punishing poachers. This was about me, about the choice I'd been avoiding my whole life, whether to honor my Cherokee blood or keep serving a system that saw the forest as just another resource to be managed. "What do you want from me?" I asked in Cherokee, the words feeling strange after so many years of English. "Become the bridge between worlds, teach both peoples the old laws, make sure the balance is never forgotten again." Kekle gestured to the kneeling Tommy Dawson. "This one shows proper respect. He may live. The others have chosen their path." I looked at Tommy, saw the genuine terror and remorse in his young face. Maybe 19 years old, probably pressured into this hunt by his older brothers. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll be your bridge. But the boy comes with me. He's young enough to learn better." Kekle nodded slowly. "It is agreed. But know this, Bridgewalker, you serve both worlds now. You will carry both burdens. Some of your own people will call you traitor. Some of mine will call you weak." Earl Dawson chose that moment to make his last mistake. He jumped up from behind the log and fired his rifle at Kekle's back. The Eternal Hunter turned, caught the bullet in his bare hand, and crushed it to powder. Then he gestured, and Earl simply came apart. Not violently, not bloodily. He just faded away like morning mist, leaving only his empty clothes crumpled on the forest floor. "The choice is made," Kekle said. "Balance is restored. For now." Tommy Dawson spent 3 days in the hospital, recovering from shock and what the doctors called severe psychological trauma. When he was finally able to talk, he told everyone who'd listened that monsters made of moonlight had killed his brothers and cousin. Nobody believed him. The official report listed the Dawson brothers as missing, presumed dead in a hunting accident. Their bodies were never found, and eventually the case was closed and filed away. I kept my mouth shut and did my job. But things were different now. I could feel Kekle watching from the deep forest, a presence like distant thunder, that never quite faded. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, I heard Cherokee voices on the wind, my ancestors welcoming me back to the old ways. The poaching stopped almost completely. Word spread among hunters that something was wrong in the Cherokee National Forest, something that didn't forgive disrespect. The smart ones started following traditional hunting protocols, taking only what they needed, using everything they killed, saying prayers over the animals that gave their lives. I helped them understand, started teaching Cherokee hunting ceremonies alongside modern conservation techniques, showed them how to read the signs that meant the forest was healthy, how to know when they'd taken enough. Most hunters appreciated the education. A few called me crazy or complained to my supervisors about Indian mysticism creeping into forest management. But my success rate spoke for itself. Wildlife populations increased, hunting accidents decreased, and the forest began to feel balanced again. Tommy Dawson became one of my best success stories. The kid was so shaken by what he'd seen that he gave up hunting entirely for 2 years. When he finally returned to the woods, it was with a Cherokee elder who taught him proper ceremony and respect. Now, he's one of the most ethical hunters in 3 counties. Late at night, sitting in my cabin, I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice. I'm caught between 2 worlds now, serving laws that don't always agree with each other. When a poacher breaks federal hunting regulations, I enforce federal law. But when someone violates the deeper laws, the ones about respect and balance, I let older justice take its course. Some might call that vigilantism. I call it remembering. Keklikudla still walks the ridge during full moons. I've seen his tracks, heard his call echoing through the valleys. He's waiting, watching, making sure the balance holds, and I'm here to help. Ranger William. Crowfeather, servant of 2 peoples, keeper of 2 kinds of law. Some badges are made of metal and issued by governments. Others are made of blood and bone and the weight of ancestral responsibility. I wear both, and I sleep better than I have in years. The forest remembers its own, and now so do I. My name is Martha Asheville, but everyone calls me Marty. I've been a park ranger here in the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years now. When I started, I was the first woman to get this job, and believe me, I had to work twice as hard to prove I belonged. These mountains are my home, my life, and my responsibility. I know every trail, every stream, every dangerous spot where families need to be careful. That's my specialty, keeping kids safe. I run camping programs, teach parents about bear safety, and make sure children don't wander off where they shouldn't. I carry extra supplies for little ones in my pack, bandages, snacks, even a tiny emergency blanket. Always prepared, that's me. But I wasn't always this way. 5 years ago, I was just another ranger doing my job. Then, everything changed in one terrible day. It was August 1966. A flash flood came through Cataract Falls faster than anyone expected. My 7-year-old daughter Emma was playing by the water while I checked on some campers nearby. I heard the roar of water and turned around, but she was already gone. Just gone. I searched for 2 years. Every day off, every spare hour. I knew these mountains better than anyone. If Emma was out there, I would find her. But I never did. Finally, I had to accept what everyone else already knew. My little girl was dead. That's when the gray started showing in my hair, even though I was only 33. That's when I started carrying those child-sized supplies. And that's when I became the ranger who never, ever lets a child out of her sight. The other rangers understand. They know why I get nervous when kids run ahead on trails. They know why I count heads 3 times before we move camp. They've seen me wake up at night during camping trips just to check that all the children are still in their tents. People trust me because of what happened to Emma. Parents, look at me and think, she knows how dangerous these mountains can be. They're right, I do know. I learned the hardest way possible. So when 3 different families came to me in July 1971, all telling the same strange story, I listened carefully. Their kids had been playing with another little girl during their camping trips, a girl who knew secret paths through the forest. a girl who could show them hidden caves and the best places to find pretty rocks. What did she look like? I asked each family. The descriptions were always the same: 7 years old, brown hair and pigtails, wearing a yellow dress with small flowers on it. She told them her name was Emma. My heart stopped each time I heard it. Yellow dress with flowers. That's what my Emma was wearing when she died. But that was impossible. Emma was gone. She'd been gone for 5 years. I'd accepted that. I'd moved on. Hadn't I? The first time someone mentioned it, I figured it was just a coincidence. Kids make up imaginary friends all the time, especially when they're somewhere new and exciting. The name Emma isn't that unusual. The second time I started paying attention. The third time I knew something was wrong. The Morrison family was staying at Campsite 12, the same area where Emma used to love playing. Mr. Morrison found me at the ranger station on a Tuesday morning looking worried. My 6-year-old son Jake keeps talking about this girl he's been playing with, he said. Says she knows all the best hiding spots, but we haven't seen any other kids around. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. Can you tell me exactly what Jake said? Mr. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. He says she showed him a trail that leads to a waterfall nobody else knows about. Says she can walk on the rocks without falling, even when they're wet. But here's the thing, Ranger Asheville, Jake described this girl perfectly, and he's never seen her with parents. She just appears when he's playing alone. I kept my voice steady. What does she look like? Small, around 7, brown hair and pigtails, wearing a yellow sundress with little flowers. My hands went cold. Did she tell Jake her name? Emma. She told him her name was Emma. That afternoon, I hiked out to Campsite 12. The Morrison family was getting ready for a nature walk, and Jake was bouncing with excitement. Can Emma come with us? He asked his parents. She knows where the best berries are. I knelt down next to Jake. Can you tell me more about Emma? His face lit up. She's really nice. She knows all the secret places in the forest. Yesterday she showed me a cave that has pictures on the walls. And she can talk to the animals. I saw her pet a bear cub. A chill ran down my spine. Bear cubs meant mother bears nearby. That was exactly the kind of danger I trained families to avoid. Jake, where did you meet Emma? By the big rocks near the water. She was sitting there crying, so I asked her what was wrong. She said she was lost and couldn't find her mommy. But then she started smiling and said she could show me all her favorite places. I spent the rest of the day checking every trail near Campsite 12. I found small footprints in the mud by the stream, child-sized, but old. Too old. They should have washed away days ago, but they looked fresh. Near the big rocks Jake mentioned, I found something that made my blood freeze. A small yellow hair ribbon, the kind Emma used to wear. It was clean, bright, as if it had just been dropped, but it was tied around a stick that had been stuck in the ground, like a marker. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jake's story, about the bear cub, about footprints that shouldn't exist. Around midnight I decided to patrol the campsite area. The moon was full, casting long shadows through the trees. Everything looked normal until I reached the stream near Campsite 12. That's when I saw her, a small figure in a yellow dress, standing by the water, and she was facing away from me, her brown hair in messy pigtails. For a moment, my heart stopped completely. Emma? I whispered. The figure turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her profile. It was Emma. It was impossible, but it was her. The same small nose, the same stubborn chin. I took a step forward, and she turned to face me fully. Her eyes were wide and confused. Mommy? She said in a voice I remembered from my dreams. Mommy, I can't find you. Where did you go? I tried to move toward her, but my legs felt like lead. This wasn't possible. Emma was dead. I'd accepted that. I'd grieved. I'd moved on. Emma, honey, is that really you? She smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through clouds. I've been waiting for you, Mommy. I found so many friends to play with. They're all lost too, but we take care of each other. What friends, baby? The other kids. They can't find their parents either, but it's okay. I show them all the fun places. We play together every day. A terrible understanding began creeping over me. Emma, what other kids? But when I looked up, she was gone. Just like that. The stream gurgled peacefully, and an owl called in the distance. I stood there for an hour, but she didn't come back. The next morning, the Morrisons packed up and left early. Jake was crying. I want to say goodbye to Emma, he kept saying. She promised to show me the secret waterfall today. I helped them load their car, trying to act normal. But inside, I was falling apart. Either I was losing my mind, or something impossible was happening in these mountains. That afternoon, I got a call on my radio. Another family, the Hendersons, were reporting that their 8-year-old daughter had gone missing for 3 hours. They'd found her eventually, playing by herself near Cataract Falls. She says she was with another little girl, Mrs. Henderson told me. A girl named Emma, who knew all the trails, but we never saw anyone else. I was starting to understand that this wasn't going away. Whatever was happening, Emma was somehow involved. My dead daughter was appearing to other children, leading them to dangerous places. The question was, why? Over the next 2 weeks, the reports kept coming. The Patel family said their 5-year-old son had been found standing at the edge of a cliff, claiming Emma had shown him where the eagles live. The Johnson twins, both 9 years old, went missing for a whole morning and came back talking about Emma's underwater house near the rapids. Each time, the children were found in dangerous places. Each time, they insisted Emma had led them there. Each time, they described her perfectly, right down to the yellow dress with flowers. I started keeping a map, marking every location where Emma had been spotted. The pattern was clear. All the sightings happened near Cataract Falls, in the area where she'd died. But they were spreading outward, like ripples in a pond. The worst part was that the children all loved her. They talked about Emma like she was their best friend. They begged their parents to let them go find her again. They cried when it was time to leave the campsite. Emma knows all the secret places, 7-year-old Sarah Chen told me. She showed me where the fairies live, under the big waterfall. She can walk right through the water and not get wet. I started patrolling the area every night, hoping to see Emma again. I needed to understand what was happening. On the 3rd night, I got my wish. She appeared by the old oak tree where she used to climb when she was alive. This time, she looked solid, real. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought she was just another lost camper. "Hi, Mommy," she said, like no time had passed at all. "I missed you." I sat down on a fallen log, trying to stay calm. "I missed you too, baby. But Emma, you've been gone for 5 years." She looked confused. "Gone? But I'm right here. I've been waiting for you to come play with me." "Emma, you remember what happened by the water? The day you—" I couldn't say it. Her face scrunched up like she was trying to remember something difficult. "It got really loud and really cold. And then everything went dark. But then I woke up and there were other kids here. Kids like me, who couldn't find their mommies and daddies." "What other kids?" "Tommy and Sue and little Mary. They've been here a long time. Tommy says he's been waiting since before there were cars. But it's okay. We take care of each other. And now I take care of the visiting kids too." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean, you take care of them?" Emma's eyes brightened. "I show them all the best places. The caves with pretty rocks, the trees that are good for climbing, the spots where you can see the whole valley. The grown-ups never want to go to the really fun places." "Emma, some of those places are dangerous." She looked hurt. "They're not dangerous if you know the secrets." "I know all the secrets now. The mountain told me." "The mountain told you?" Emma nodded seriously. "She talks to all of us lost kids. She keeps us safe and warm. She says she's lonely too because people used to visit her more. Now they just drive by in their cars. She misses when children used to play in her forests." I felt a deep wrongness in what she was saying, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Emma, the children you play with, They have to go home to their parents. They can't stay here. Emma's face fell. But why? It's so much fun here, and their parents are always worried and scared. Here, nobody worries, nobody gets scared. We can play forever. Because their parents love them, just like I love you. Then why don't you stay and play too? Emma asked. The mountain likes you. She remembers when you used to bring me here all the time. She says you could stay, and we could be together forever. Every part of me wanted to say yes. This was my daughter, my little girl I'd grieved for 5 years. She was right here talking to me, smiling at me. How could I walk away from that? But then I thought about Jake Morrison and the Patel boy at the cliff edge and all the other children who'd been led to dangerous places. Emma, honey, some of the kids you've been playing with got hurt, or almost got hurt. She shook her head firmly. No, I keep them safe. I show them how to walk on the wet rocks, how to climb the tall trees, how to swim in the deep water. I teach them what the mountain taught me. What did the mountain teach you? Emma's voice changed, became older somehow. That there are places where the rules are different. Places where children can be brave and free. Places where loving parents don't have to worry about losing their babies. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just Emma's spirit, lost and confused. Something was using her, feeding on her love for me and my grief for her. Something that wanted to keep children here, in these mountains. Something that was getting stronger every time a child went missing. Emma, I said carefully, I need you to stop playing with the visiting children. Her face crumpled. But Mommy, they're my friends, and they're so sad when they first get here. I make them happy. They need to go home to their families. But I don't have a family anymore, Emma cried. You left me. You stopped looking for me. The words hit me like a physical blow. Oh, baby, no. I never stopped loving you. But you died, Emma. You drowned in the flood. I'm not dead, she said, and her voice echoed strangely through the trees. I'm right here. I'm talking to you. The temperature around us dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The wind picked up, making the trees creak and groan. Emma's form flickered like a bad TV signal. Emma, you need to let go. You need to rest. No, she screamed, and the sound was like breaking glass. I won't go. I won't leave again. And I won't let my friends leave either. The wind became a howling gale. Reese bent almost to the ground. And through it all, I heard other voices, children's voices, calling out in fear and anger. When the wind died down, Emma was gone. But I could hear her voice carried on the night air. The mountain will keep us all safe, Mommy. You'll see. The next morning brought chaos. 3 families reported their children missing, all at the same time, all from different campsites. The largest search and rescue operation in park history began immediately. We found the kids 6 hours later, all of them standing in a circle in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. They were holding hands, singing a song none of their parents recognized. Their eyes were distant, dreamy. When we approached them, they didn't seem to see us at first. Then the youngest, a 4-year-old named Lucy, looked up and smiled. Emma says we can stay now, she announced. Emma says the mountain mother wants us to be her children too. All the children nodded in agreement. They talked about Emma like she was standing right there with them. They said she'd shown them the mountain mother's secret places, taught them the mountain mother's songs. But here's what made my blood run cold. They all knew things they shouldn't know. Lucy described the interior of caves that were sealed off to tourists. 8-year-old Marcus drew a perfect map of underground streams that weren't on any official survey. They all talked about the other lost children who lived in the mountain permanently. We managed to get the kids back to their parents, but none of them wanted to leave. They cried and fought and begged to go back to Emma. Their parents were terrified. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I went back to the clearing where we'd found the children, carrying a backpack full of supplies and my Ranger radio. I was going to end this, whatever it took. Emma appeared almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for me. I knew you'd come back, she said happily. The mountain mother is so excited to meet you properly. Emma, We need to talk. About what you're doing to these children. Her smile faded. I'm not doing anything bad, Mommy. I'm giving them what you gave me. Love and safety and fun. But better, because here, it never has to end. It does have to end, baby. These children have families who love them. Families who will lose them anyway. Emma's voice rose. Families who will make the same mistakes you made. Families who will let their children die. The accusation hit me like a punch. Because she was right. I had let her die. I'd turned away for just a moment, and she was gone. You're right, I admitted. I failed you. I should have been watching more carefully. I should have kept you safe. Emma's anger melted into sadness. You did keep me safe, Mommy. You taught me to swim, to climb, to be careful around animals. But the mountain can keep children safer. Here, nobody ever dies. Nobody ever gets lost. Nobody ever has to say goodbye. But they're not really living, are they? Before Emma could answer, the ground beneath us began to shift. Trees moved aside like curtains. The earth itself rose up, forming the shape of an enormous woman made of soil and roots and stone. The Mountain Mother. Her voice was like wind through caves, like water over rocks. Martha Asheville, she said, and my name echoed from every tree. I have been waiting to speak with you. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of maternal love radiating from this ancient being. She felt like every mother who'd ever lost a child, every parent who'd ever worried about their baby's safety. You understand loss, she continued. You understand the fear that keeps parents awake at night. I can take that fear away. I can keep all children safe, forever. By trapping them here? By loving them here. Look at your Emma. See how happy she is, how free from fear and pain. Emma nodded eagerly. It's true, Mommy. I am never scared here. I'm never cold or hungry or hurt, and neither are my friends. But you're not growing up, I said quietly. You're not learning new things, making new memories. You're stuck. The Mountain Mother's presence grew stronger, more persuasive. Growth brings pain. Learning brings disappointment. Memory brings grief. I offer something better. Eternal childhood, eternal joy. That's not life. That's just existing. And what is life? The Mountain Mother challenged. Brief happiness followed by inevitable loss. Better to have perfect happiness that never ends. I looked at Emma, my beautiful daughter who would never grow up, never go to school, never fall in love, never have children of her own. She was preserved like a flower pressed in a book, beautiful but no longer truly alive. Emma, I said, do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? Her face brightened. A park ranger like you. And what did you want to do as a park ranger? Help people. Keep families safe in the mountains. That's right. But honey, keeping those children here isn't helping them. It's keeping them from becoming who they're supposed to be. Emma's certainty wavered. But they're safe here. Being safe isn't the same as being alive. The Mountain Mother's presence darkened. You would choose risk over certainty? Pain over peace? I choose life over death, even if life is harder. Then you choose to lose your daughter forever. The words nearly broke me, but I thought about all the children I'd helped over the years, all the families I'd kept safe while still letting them explore and grow. That was the real job of protecting children, not keeping them from all danger, but teaching them to face danger wisely. Emma, I said, fighting back tears, I love you more than anything in the world. But love means wanting what's best for someone, even when it hurts. What's best for me is staying with you. What's best for you is resting peacefully, knowing that you were loved completely while you were alive. Emma began to cry, and her tears were like rain on my face. I don't want to go, Mommy. I'm scared. I know, baby, but I'll be okay. And someday, when I'm old and my work here is done, maybe I'll see you again. But right now, you need to let go. You need to let the other children go too." The mountain mother roared with anger. "You cannot take them from me. They are mine now." "No," I said firmly. "They're nobody's to take. Children aren't possessions. They're people with their own lives to live." Emma looked back and forth between me and the mountain mother. I could see her struggling, torn between the supernatural force that had kept her here and her love for me. "The choice is yours, Emma," I said softly. "I can't make it for you, but I trust you to choose what's right." For a long moment, everything was silent. Then Emma stepped away from the mountain mother and toward me. "I choose to let go," she whispered. The mountain mother's scream of rage shook the entire forest, but Emma's form began to glow with warm, peaceful light. "I love you, Mommy," she said. "Take care of the other children for me." "I will, baby. I promise." Emma smiled one last time and then she was gone. Not vanished, but truly gone, in peace. The mountain mother's presence faded with a sound like grinding stone. The unnatural clearing disappeared, leaving just normal forest. And in the silence that followed, I heard something that made my heart leap. Children's voices, calling for their parents, no longer lost. The official report said that 7 children had experienced group hysteria during a camping trip and wandered into the forest together. They were found confused but unharmed, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. That was the story we told the media, the families, and the Park Service headquarters. It was easier than the truth. But I knew what really happened. Emma had chosen to move on, and in doing so, she'd freed the other spirits, the children who'd been lost in these mountains for decades. The mountain mother's hold was broken. 3 months later, I requested a transfer to the administrative office. I couldn't handle field work with families anymore. Every time I saw a child Emma's age, I remembered that last conversation. Every time parents asked me to keep their kids safe, I thought about the choice between safety and freedom. I still work for the Park Service, but now I write safety protocols and train new rangers. I teach them about the real dangers in these mountains: flash floods, wildlife, difficult terrain, and how to help families navigate those dangers without taking away the joy of exploration. I don't carry child-sized emergency supplies anymore. Emma doesn't need them, and somehow that feels right. The reports of children playing with mysterious companions stopped completely after that night. The Cataract Falls area became just another beautiful part of the Great Smokies, no more dangerous than any other wilderness area. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, I walk the trails near where Emma died, not looking for her. I know she's at peace. Just remembering her and thinking about all the children whose lives she saved by choosing to let go. People ask me sometimes if I regret my decision, if I wish I'd chosen differently, taken the mountain mother's offer to be with Emma forever. The answer is no. Love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. Emma taught me that in the end. My 7-year-old daughter, braver than her mother, choosing what was right over what was easy. Some losses can't be healed, and some love is too strong to let go, even after death. But sometimes the strongest love is the kind that does let go, trusting that what comes next will be okay. I still miss her every day, but I'm proud of the choice she made, and I keep my promise to her. I take care of the other children, the living ones, helping them explore these beautiful, dangerous mountains safely. That's what park rangers do. We protect and serve, even when it breaks our hearts. My name is Mike Holloway, and I've spent 11 years above ground after 20 below. That's how I always start when folks ask about my work in the New River Gorge. Most people think being a park ranger is all about trees and trails, but around here it's different. This place used to be coal country, and the mountains still remember. I wasn't always a ranger. Used to work the Beckley seam, 300 feet down in the dark. Had calloused hands and a strong back, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. Coal dust gets in your blood, they say. Makes you part of the mountain itself. That changed in 1967. I was 23 then, working alongside Jimmy Parker, Bob Chen, and little Tommy Morrison. We called him Little Tommy, even though he was bigger than all of us. The mountain took them on a Tuesday morning when the roof came down. I was 50 feet back, checking rail ties, when I heard the sound no miner ever wants to hear, that deep groan of stone giving up its fight with gravity. By the time we dug them out, it was too late. 3 good men, dead because I'd been checking ties instead of watching for loose rock. The mine company called it an accident. I called it my fault. So I quit the mines and took a job up top, working for the Park Service. Figured I'd help keep people safe instead of leading them into danger. Been doing that for 11 years now, documenting the old mining sites, making sure nobody falls down a forgotten shaft or walks into a gas pocket. These mountains are full of holes, and every hole has a story. I still wear my hard hat, even up here in the sunshine. People think it's strange, but you don't spend 20 years underground and just forget to protect your head. Plus, I'm missing 2 fingers on my left hand from a conveyor belt accident, and I cough up black stuff every morning. The mountain marks its own. My job now is to preserve the mines, in history for future generations. I've cataloged over 200 abandoned mine sites in this area alone. Every one tells a story of men who went down into the dark and hoped to come back up. Most did, some didn't. The schools bring kids through here all the time, wanting to learn about how their great-granddaddies lived and worked. It's good for them to understand what built these mountains, what cost it took. I show them the old equipment, tell them about the dangers, make sure they know why we don't go into the old shafts anymore. Last month, though, something started happening that made me think maybe all the mine children weren't accounted for. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Hill Elementary brought her 4th grade class through, same as she does every spring. But when they came back to the visitor center, she looked pale as mountain mist. "Mr. Holloway," she said, keeping her voice low so the kids wouldn't hear, "some of the children got separated from our group near the old Coal Creek site. When we found them, they said other children had been showing them around. Local kids who knew all about the mining history." I frowned. There weren't any local kids out there. The nearest houses were 5 miles away, and no children lived there anyway. "What did these kids look like?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "That's the strange part. When I asked, my students couldn't really describe them clearly. Said they were wearing old-fashioned clothes, like from the pictures in the museum, and they knew things." She paused. "They knew things about mines that closed before any of us were born." That's when I knew something was wrong. Real wrong. After 20 years underground and 11 years above, I thought I'd seen all the dangers these mountains could hold. But as I watched Mrs. Patterson's bus pull away, taking those confused children back to safety, I had the sinking feeling that some dangers don't stay buried. The mountain was trying to tell me something, and after what happened to Jimmy, Bob, and little Tommy, I should have been listening closer. The next week I decided to check out the Coal Creek site myself. It's about 3 miles up a winding trail past the old tipple where they used to load coal cars. The morning was cold for March, with frost still clinging to the rocks like tiny diamonds. I'd been to Coal Creek plenty of times before. It was one of the safer sites. Most of the dangerous shafts were already sealed with concrete plugs, and the area was stable enough for school groups. But as I walked up the trail, something felt different. The birds weren't singing. In 20 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard them this quiet. Even the squirrels seemed to be hiding. My breath came out in white puffs, though it wasn't really cold enough for that. The trees looked wrong too, like they were leaning away from something instead of toward the sun. When I reached the old mining camp, I stopped and looked around. Everything appeared normal. Rusted equipment scattered around, old building foundations, the sealed mine entrance with its warning signs. But the silence was so thick, I could almost touch it. That's when I saw the footprints. Small ones, like children would make, pressed into a patch of mud near the mine entrance. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. They weren't regular shoe prints. They looked like the prints from old mining boots, the kind with metal plates on the bottom that men wore underground 50 years ago. Except these were tiny, child-sized. I knelt down and touched one of the prints. The mud was wet, like it had been made recently, but there hadn't been rain in 3 days. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" My voice echoed off the rocks and came back sounding strange, like it had traveled through a long tunnel instead of open air. I waited, listening hard, but heard nothing. Then I noticed the coal dust, fresh coal dust, scattered around in patterns that didn't make sense. It looked like someone had been playing with it, making designs, but the nearest active mine was 20 miles away and there was no reason for fresh coal to be here. I followed the little footprints around the side of the mountain. They led to a shaft I'd never seen before, one that wasn't on any of my maps. The opening was small, maybe 4 feet high, and partially hidden by brush. No warning signs, no concrete plug, just a dark hole leading down into the earth. Cold air was coming out of that hole, not the normal cool you'd expect from underground, but freezing cold, like winter had gotten trapped down there and couldn't find its way out. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it into the opening. The beam seemed to get swallowed up after just a few feet, like the darkness was thicker than it should be. But in that brief moment before the light disappeared, I saw something that made me stumble backward. A small figure, standing just inside the tunnel. A child, wearing what looked like old mining clothes, canvas pants, a cloth shirt, and a tiny hard hat. The figure was facing away from me, perfectly still. "Hey!" I shouted. "Kid, get out of there! It's dangerous!" The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to hear me. I looked around for a way to climb down safely. The opening was too small for me to fit through easily, but if there was a child in trouble, I had to try. When I looked back with my flashlight, though, the figure was gone. I spent the next hour searching around the shaft, calling out, looking for any sign of where the child might have gone. Nothing. But the cold air kept flowing out of that hole, and I swear I could hear something down there. Not quite voices, not quite footsteps, but something moving around in the dark. That evening, I called Mrs. Patterson to ask more about what her students had seen. She sounded worried when she heard my voice. "Mr. Holloway, I'm so glad you called. I've been meaning to get back in touch with you. 3 of my students have been acting strange since our field trip. They keep talking about wanting to go back to the mine, saying their new friends are waiting for them." "What friends?" "The children they met. They keep asking when we can visit the working children again. When I ask what they mean by working children, they just say the kids who showed them how to sort coal and check for gas pockets." "Mr. Holloway, how would 4th graders know about gas pockets?" "They wouldn't. No child should know about testing for methane gas in mine shafts. That was dangerous, technical work that took years to learn. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to keep those children away from the mining sites, all of them. Don't bring any more school groups out here until I figure out what's going on." After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, thinking. 20 years underground had taught me to trust my instincts about danger, and every instinct I had was screaming that something was very, very wrong at Coal Creek. The mountain was trying to tell me something, all right. The question was whether I was brave enough to listen. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that small figure standing in the tunnel, perfectly still like a statue made of shadow. So before dawn, I loaded my truck with proper cave equipment and drove back to Coal Creek. This time, I was going down. The shaft was still there, still breathing out that unnatural cold. I'd brought a portable gas detector, rope, and a better flashlight. If there really was a child down there, I was going to find them and get them out safely. The opening was just wide enough for me to squeeze through if I took off my pack first. The moment I dropped into the tunnel, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost began forming on my flashlight lens. The tunnel was old, hand-carved, probably from the 1920s. The walls showed pick marks and old wooden support beams. Ms. held up the ceiling. But here's what didn't make sense. The tunnel was in perfect condition. No cave-ins, no rotten timber, no flooding. After 50-plus years, it should have been a death trap. I followed the main passage for about 50 feet before it opened into a larger chamber. What I saw there made me stop breathing for a moment. Child-sized mining equipment, tiny pickaxes, small coal carts, little oil lamps hanging from the walls. Everything perfectly preserved, like someone had been maintaining it all these years. And scratched into the wall in a child's handwriting. Jimmy, age 9. Sarah, age 11. Tommy, age 8, Mary, age 10. Dozens of names and ages, all between 8 and 12 years old. My gas detector started beeping. Not a dangerous reading, but higher than normal. Something was definitely wrong with the air down here. That's when I heard the voices. Soft, distant, echoing from deeper in the mine. Children's voices, talking quietly among themselves. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was serious, like kids trying to do important work. I followed the sound through a narrow passage that led to another chamber. This one had rail tracks running through it, old-style mining carts sitting on the rails. The voices were coming from just ahead, around a bend in the tunnel. I turned off my flashlight and listened. The voices were clearer now. Need to check the 3rd level for gas pockets. Cart number 7 has a loose wheel. New people coming tomorrow. We need to show them safe paths. These were children talking about mining operations, like they'd been doing it their whole lives, using technical terms that most adults didn't know. I turned my light back on and stepped around the corner. They were there. 5 of them, maybe 6. It was hard to tell because they kept moving in and out of the shadows. Children wearing old-fashioned Ming clothes, carrying tiny tools, working with the same serious concentration I remembered from my early days underground. They looked up when my light hit them. Pale faces, dark eyes, coal, dust streaked on their cheeks. For a moment we all just stared at each other. Then the smallest one, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, stepped forward. "Are you here to work?" she asked. Her voice sounded strange, like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm here to help you get out. This place isn't safe for children." She looked confused. "But we work here. We've always worked here. The mountain needs us. How long have you been down here?" The children looked at each other, and I saw something in their eyes that made my heart sink. They genuinely didn't know. "Since the bad air came," said an older boy, maybe 12. "We were helping check the lower tunnels when the bad air came. Boss told us to stay and keep working until it was safe to go up." Bad air. That's what miners called methane gas in the old days. "What year is it?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. 1924, the girl replied immediately. March 15th, 1924. My blood went cold. March 15th, 1924. I knew that date. Every miner in West Virginia knew that date. That was when the Coal Creek disaster happened. Methane explosion. 31 dead, including 8 child workers. These weren't living children. These were the ghosts of kids who died in 1924, and they didn't know they were dead. "Listen to me carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to go up to the surface. Your families are worried about you." But even as I said it, I realized the horrible truth. These children had been dead for 54 years. Their families were long gone, and somehow they were still here, still working, still trying to do their jobs because no one had ever told them they could stop. The boy shook his head. "Can't go up yet. Too much bad air. We have to keep the tunnel safe for the next shift." That's when I understood. They were trapped here, not just by death, but by duty. They died trying to protect the adult miners, and they were still trying to do that job. And somehow they thought modern children were the next shift coming down to work. I had to get out of there. I had to figure out how to help them. But as I backed away toward the tunnel entrance, the temperature dropped even more, and my flashlight started flickering. "Don't go," the little girl called after me. "The mountain gets angry when people leave their work unfinished." I ran. For the first time since 1967, I ran away from people who needed help. But I knew I wasn't running from children anymore. I was running from something much, much worse. I spent 2 days researching everything I could find about the 1924 Coal Creek disaster. The local newspaper archives, mining company records, even talked to some old-timers who remembered their grandfathers talking about it. What I found made everything worse. The disaster wasn't just a methane explosion. According to the reports, something had gone wrong with the ventilation system weeks before the accident. Miners reported strange sounds coming from the deeper tunnels, equipment moving on its own, and areas that stayed cold no matter how many warming fires they lit. The children who died weren't just working, they were trying to evacuate the lower levels when the explosion happened. They died heroes, staying behind to make sure the adult miners got out safely. But here's the part that really scared me. The mine company sealed the shafts immediately after the accident. No investigation, no recovery of bodies. They just poured concrete and walked away. The families never got their children back. I was reading through old mining reports when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, and she sounded panicked. "Mr. Holloway, 3 of my students are missing. They disappeared during recess." But that's not the worst part. Other children saw them walking toward the mountains with a group of kids none of us recognized. Kids in old-fashioned clothes. Heart stopped. When? 2 hours ago. We've called the police, but they don't know these mountains like you do. Please, you have to help us find them. I grabbed my equipment and drove to Coal Creek faster than I should have. The police were already there, along with search and rescue teams, but they were looking in all the wrong places. They didn't know about the hidden shaft. I led them to the opening I'd found. When I shined my flashlight down into it, we could hear voices, modern children's voices, mixed with the older, strange-sounding ones I recognized. "We can hear them, but the opening's too small for adults," said the police captain. "We're going to have to get special equipment to widen it." "That'll take hours," I said. "Those kids don't have hours." Before anyone could stop me, I squeezed through the opening and dropped into the tunnel. Behind me, I heard the captain shouting for rope and backup. The mine was different now, colder, darker, and the passages seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning in directions that hadn't existed before. My flashlight kept dimming, no matter how fresh the batteries were. I followed the sound of voices deeper into the mountain. The modern children were scared, crying, asking to go home. The ghost children were trying to comfort them, telling them work would start soon, that they just needed to learn the safety procedures first. I found them in the large chamber where I'd seen the equipment before. 3 living children, 2 girls and a boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, sitting with 5 ghost children who looked just as real and solid as they did. But that's not what made me freeze in terror. Behind them, the chamber extended much farther than it had before. And in that extension, I could see dozens more ghost children, maybe hundreds, all ages, all time periods, stretching back through decades of mining disasters, all still working, still trying to keep the mountains safe. And at the very back, in the deepest shadows, something huge was watching. Something that made the air itself feel heavy with hunger. "Mr. Holloway," one of the living children called out when she saw me, "we want to go home, but our new friends say we have to work first." The smallest ghost child, the girl I'd met before, looked at me with those dark, endless eyes. "The mountain is hungry," she said simply. "It's been hungry for so long. We keep feeding it our work, but it wants more. It wants helpers who can bring others." That's when I understood the horrible truth. The ghost children weren't just trapped by duty. They were being used. Something ancient and evil lived in these mountains, something that fed on death and suffering. Every mining disaster, every life lost underground, made it stronger. And now it wanted the living children to help bring it more food. "Listen to me," I said to the living children. "We're going right now. Stay close to me, and don't look back." But as we started toward the tunnel entrance, the temperature dropped to freezing. Ice began forming on the walls, and our breath came out in thick clouds that seemed to hang in the air too long. The ghost children stepped in front of us. "Can't go yet," the boy said sadly. "Mountain's orders. New workers need to learn the job first." Behind them, that massive presence in the shadows shifted, and I heard a sound like tons of rock settling deep underground. Except it wasn't rock. It was something alive, something ancient and patient and endlessly hungry. The living children pressed closer to me, whimpering with fear. I put my arms around them and made a choice. "You kids want to do your job?" I called out to the ghost children. "Your real job was keeping miners safe, right?" They nodded. Then help me get these children out of here. That is what good miners do. We take care of each other. For a moment, the ghost children looked confused. Then the little girl smiled, and for just an instant, she looked like a normal, happy child instead of something trapped and lost. You're right, she said. That's what good miners do. That's when the mountain got angry. The whole mine started shaking. Rock dust fell from the ceiling, and the old wooden support beams groaned under pressure they were never meant to handle. In the deep shadows, that ancient thing let out a sound like an avalanche mixed with a scream, but the ghost children stood their ground. Maybe for the first time in 54 years they remembered who they really were. Not the mountain's prisoners, but heroes who had died protecting others. This way, the little girl shouted, and she led us through passages that appeared as we needed them, past cave-ins that somehow weren't there when we approached. Behind us, I could hear the mountain thing coming, sliding through tunnels like some massive snake made of stone and darkness. The walls started closing in, trying to trap us, but the ghost children seemed to know every secret way through the maze. Hurry, the older boy called back. It's really angry now. We reached the main tunnel just as part of the ceiling collapsed behind us. The ghost children pushed us toward the entrance, their forms getting fainter as we moved away from the deep places where they'd been trapped so long. Go, the little girl said. We'll hold it back. What about you? I asked. She smiled, and in that smile I saw peace for the first time. We're finally going home. Been waiting so long to go home. I lifted the 3 living children up through the entrance one by one, then pulled myself out just as the entire mine system collapsed. The ground shook for almost a minute, and then everything went quiet. The ghost children were gone. All of them. I could feel it. They'd finally found their way to whatever comes after, free from the thing that had been using them. The rescue teams pulled us away from the area as more sections of the mountain settled. By morning, the whole Coal Creek site was declared geologically unstable, off limits to everyone. The 3 children I'd brought out were fine physically, but they needed counseling. They remembered everything: the ghost children, the cold, the sense of something huge and hungry watching them. But kids are tougher than adults sometimes. They healed. As for me, I finally stopped wearing my hard hat above ground. For the first time since 1967, I felt like I could breathe freely. The guilt I'd carried about Jimmy, Bob, and little Tommy didn't disappear, but it got lighter. Sometimes people die, and it's not your fault. Sometimes they die heroes, and the best thing you can do is remember them right. I still work for the Park Service, still catalog mining sites, still tell school groups about the history of coal country, but I tell them about the real history now, not just the industry, but the cost, the men who died underground, the children who should have been playing instead of working, the families that never got their loved ones back. Some jobs are too dangerous for anyone, and some debts get paid by generations not yet born. The mountains around here are quiet now, safer. Whatever was feeding on all that old pain and death is gone, buried under tons of rock and earth. But sometimes, on very quiet nights, I think I can hear children laughing somewhere far away. Not trapped, not working, just playing the way children should. And that sound makes me think maybe the mountain has finally learned to sleep peacefully. The dead can rest now. The living are safe. And for the first time in 54 years, the Coal Creek children are home.